meeting of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. I shall, I guess, for starters, we have our roll call. Shamika, do you want to do that, or would you like me to do it? Sounds like I will take that. And just for everyone's awareness, we do have a few new commissioners. So if you hear some new names, don't be surprised.
I can take it, David. Sorry, my internet is unstable right now.
No problem. Go ahead, Shamika.
Commissioner Fine?
Present.
Commissioner Chima?
Here.
Commissioner Dangerfield?
Present.
Commissioner Hyde?
Present. Sorry for the delay.
Commissioner Harger?
Present.
Commissioner Lindheim?
Present.
Commissioner Walker? Okay. Commissioner Walker? Okay. Commissioner Ghosh?
Present.
Commissioner Ijigu?
Present.
Commissioner Optin?
Present.
Commissioner Blake?
Present.
Commissioner Polk? Commissioner Polk? Present. Commissioner Malvito? Commissioner Malvito? Okay. Temporary Chair Mizell?
Here.
Commissioner Lutzker?
Here.
Commissioner Ho? I thought I saw her.
I thought I did too.
Commissioner Ho?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I must be having some issues with my mic. Present.
Thank you. And we have one more. Commissioner Diaz?
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Thank you. Let's go back to Commissioner Walker. Okay, so we have 16 of 17 task force members present.
Great. Thank you, Shamika. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. So before we dive in too far into our agenda and turn it over to our temporary chair, Mizell, we have two special guests with us this evening, Mayor Jesse Arreguín and our city manager, Dee Williams Ridley. And if I got this all correct, for them to open up with some comments, Dee, I'll turn it over to you to kick it off.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Shamika. And good evening, everyone. It's just amazing to see the beautiful faces on this call this evening. And I am extremely grateful for your community service and for your support and work that's yet to get started and get underway for this really important process. I wanted to just share with you all the importance that this process has for me as a city manager. I'm not certain if all of you have had an opportunity to hear the regular update work that has taken place over the last few months as a result of council action last summer. But I wanted to make sure that this group knew that the commitment from my office, as well as the entire city staff that will be participating in the work that will unfold, it is with absolute certainty that we are committed to this process. Today, I'm just coming on and sharing with all of you my excitement about the project, thanking you all for your time and the what I would call the work that's going to happen at your table that will be intense, complicated, but looking at the faces on this call this evening, I know you are more than up for the task. I also want to share, and most of you are aware, that Chief Andy Greenwood will be leaving the city. His last day is effective tomorrow, Friday, March 12th. And I have appointed for an interim chief, Jen Lewis, who has been with the city department since 1999. He is currently one of the executive members of the city's workforce. This is an interim appointment. And I want to assure all of you that a community process will unfold within and begin probably early April. Next week, I'll be submitting a community letter advising the community, neighborhood groups, all of you on what that process will somewhat entail. We have not started it yet, but I want you all to be certain that Berkeley community will be assisting me in selecting our next chief of police. I don't want there to be any uncertainty as to whether or not there will be community input. I envision a very robust process. It could entail everything from a survey to to town halls. It could also include breakfast briefings, helping to write the narrative for the selection of our chief. It will be very actively engaged by both our community members, our city workforce, our police department, our labor groups. It will be very informed. So I want to thank all of you for your time, but I will need your help further on that process. So a number of you and all of you will have an opportunity to weigh in on that process. Thank you for your time. And I'm going to turn the call over to Siergi. Mr. Mayor?
Well, thank you very much, Madam City Manager, and thank you for your leadership on this important initiative. And I just want to say how excited I am that we're launching this process. I was very proud to have authored the omnibus motion that was unanimously adopted by the City Council to begin this important process around reimagining public safety. This is long overdue, but we are heeding the call from not just the Berkeley community, but millions of people all over our country who are demanding that we address the issues of systemic racism and that we look at a new paradigm for public safety. Mm-hmm. And I want you all to know that people are looking at you and they're looking at our city and what we're doing. And, you know, if you look at the history of our city, Berkeley is led in so many ways. You know, we are a city of about 120,000 residents, but we make a global impact. And just through the passage of the omnibus motion and proposing a new approach towards traffic enforcement and how we address mental health calls, and how we look at addressing issues of public safety and the social determinants that lead to, the disparities in policing and criminal justice. A lot of people are looking at Berkeley and how we are going to embark on this important initiative. And so I'm so deeply appreciative that all of you are lending your expertise and your years of experience to this important work. And we have a lot of work to do. But I and the entire City Council, and I know the city administration is very committed to partnering with you. I want to also acknowledge that I recognize that the time frame that's been outlined is short. And in speaking to city staff, my recommendation is that we address this work in phases. So phase one are recommendations that can be made to the City Council for the upcoming fiscal year 2022 budget. And then the much bigger changes and reforms that have been proposed over the next year, we can work with our consulting team and with staff and with with this task force to have thoughtful discussion and community engagement. We envision that this working group would be the hub, and the spokes would be the community process. And so I know that our police department and our consultant are envisioning a robust community engagement process. Certainly you as sort of representatives of commissions and stakeholder groups in our community are an important part of that process, but we also know that we have to get out in the community and hear from people all over the city to make sure that the new paradigm for public safety that we're proposing really truly reflects the input and the vision of our community. So I think we can ultimately land in a place that not only makes our community safer and ensures that our police department are focusing on violent and serious crime and we're deploying our resources effectively, we're controlling our budget, but also that we can address the issues of racial disparities and social determinants that have led to some of the challenges that we're facing in Berkeley and throughout our country. So I want to thank you so much. We're committed to partnering with you, and we look forward to your thoughtful input as we embark on this process. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you very much, City Manager. We appreciate you being here very much, and we understand you all have a busy schedule, so if you don't hang out for the rest of the evening, we understand, but are very grateful for your time. With that, Chair Mizell, I'll turn it over to you to take us through the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. White. Next on our agenda for tonight is approval of the minutes. This refers to the minutes of our last meeting. I don't think I saw them in the agenda packet for this week. I could be wrong, but if not, they are on the Berkeley website. And if you see any issues with the minutes, this would be the time to bring them up. Commissioner Ghost.
This one's easy. My last name is misspelled throughout, so I would like to see that corrected. It's correct in the list of commissioners, but not for the votes. So it's Ghosh, not Gosh. Thank you.
We'll fix that.
Any other concerns with the minutes from last meeting? Seeing none, a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Someone a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes of our last meeting. Are there any objections? Seeing none, pass with unanimous consent. Moving on to our next item on the agenda. We should be having a presentation from the city attorney, Ms. Rima Brown, if she is here. If not, or Mr. Harvey, are you standing in for her?
Yes, I am. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Chair Mizell, thank you. My name is Sam Harvey. I'm one of the deputy city attorneys. I'll be providing a hopefully brief but comprehensive presentation on the Brown Act, which is the open meetings law that applies to the meetings of city governing bodies, including this task force. The purpose of this presentation is to sort of provide a basic overview of the Brown Act. It's not necessarily going to answer every tiny question you might have. You can certainly feel free to reach out to our office through task force staff with any questions you might have about the Brown Act, but hopefully we can give you a good overview of kind of what are the open meetings requirements that are applying to meetings of this task force. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen here. Everyone see that all right?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So here we go. So the Brown Act is state of California's open meeting law that applies to meetings of legislative bodies of local governments. And the purpose behind the Brown Act is kind of summed up in this initial opening language, which basically says that the people in delegating their authority do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. So the basic idea here is, as a public official, you are carrying out the public's work, and in doing so, we have to strive to be, do that work in the open and in a way that the public is aware of everything we're doing. There's a nice picture of Assembly Member Ralph M. Brown, who was the sponsor of the act. So a little quick history of the act to give you a sense of kind of why it was developed and what issues it was trying to address. In the early 1950s, a number of press stories came out, particularly by the San Francisco Chronicle, pointing to local governments, particularly city councils, that had been basically conducting secret meetings. Either they had the entire meeting was secret, or in one example, in San Jose, the council was discussing a pretty contentious issue, and they said, you know what, we're going to go in the back room and sort this out. It'll be easier that way, and then we'll come out and tell you guys what we decide, right? And the argument there was that, well, we're just being practical. This is the easy way to do it. We'll get it done more quickly, and then we'll let you know what we decide. And I think, for officials, operating under the Brown Act, there can sometimes feel like there's a tension here between what is the most expeditious and efficient way to proceed and really what is required by the law in terms of, being open, being public, doing everything in a way that allows the public total access to the process. So the League of California Cities drafted a piece of legislation which was sponsored by Assemblymember Brown and signed into law by Governor Earl Warren in 1953. And the basic purpose of the Brown Act is to ensure that the public's business is done in public. So the main gist is that all meetings of legislative bodies have to be, one, open to the public. So either in person or because of COVID, we're all here on Zoom. They have to be adequately noticed ahead of time. The officials have to stick to what's on the agenda, and you have to allow the public an opportunity to speak, both on, each item on the agenda, but also to anything that's in the jurisdiction of the body. So those are things, anytime we're having a public meeting, those have to be accounted for. So that's why the agenda goes out ahead of time. Under the Brown Act, the agenda has to go out at least 72 hours ahead of time. In Berkeley, we do it even further ahead of time to provide more notice to the public. So those are the basic rules whenever we're having a meeting. So who's covered by the Brown Act? Basically all, quote, legislative bodies of the city are covered by the Brown Act. So a legislative body is the city council, its council committees, but it's also all commissions and boards. A number of you who are already on, commissions or boards, or have served on city commissions or boards previously are probably familiar with this. And it basically includes any kind of decision-making body. It doesn't include, staff, city employees meeting in their daily work, but any, body of appointed officials like this body is included. So the key question then becomes, if this is a legislative body, when does the body have to follow all these meeting rules? And basically, a meeting occurs whenever a quorum of the members of a legislative body gather to discuss business within their jurisdiction. So a quorum is a majority of the members of the body. And, a gathering can include not just a formal meeting, but, social gatherings, meetings of other legislative bodies, retreats, forums, workshops. Essentially, the main thing to be on the lookout for is ways in which you interact with other members of the task force outside of the context of a normal meeting. The normal meeting is set up to comply with the Brown Act. There's an agenda, there's a notice ahead of time, there's public comment. But if a quorum of you bump into each other at an event and start talking about, your work together, well, the public hasn't seen an agenda for that meeting. No one's gonna, been given notice that they can come and make public comment. So that's really what the big thing to look out for is. And, one of the big things that we probably get the most questions on, and it's probably the most complex area of the Brown Act, is this question of what's called serial meetings. So serial meetings, they're basically, as I said, one of the more challenging aspects of the Brown Act, but it's basically when a majority of a legislative body uses communications to discuss, deliberate, or take action on anything within the subject matter, jurisdiction of their body. They use a series of communications rather than one meeting altogether. So rather than, a quorum of you all in one room, it's a series of conversations, a series of emails, a series of written letters that add up to a quorum of the body having deliberated on a matter. And the issue here is that, these types of communications deprive the public of the right to participate in the process. So let's just jump into a couple examples. There's basically two types of serial meetings. The first is called a daisy chain meeting. And the idea here is that, one member of the body talks to another member, who then talks to a third member, who talks to a fourth member, talking about the same topic, until you've created a chain where a majority of the task force has already discussed a topic, and, outside of the context of a meeting. So while you're allowed to have individual conversations with each other outside of a context of a meeting, you should be aware of, you need to be on the lookout for this sort of chain of communication that might happen. And if that chain adds up to a majority of the task force, then you've had a meeting under the Brown Act, and that meeting should have been agendized, noticed, allowed people to publicly comment, which obviously you can't do when you've had a series of phone calls or emails. So that's one example. The other example is what's called the hub and spoke meeting. So this is the same concept, but instead of one member talking to the next, who then talks to another, then talks to a third, you have one member of the body acting as the hub and communicating with multiple other members. So member A calls member B and talks about a topic. Member A then calls member C and talks about a topic, calls member D and talks about the same topic, until basically member A has talked to a quorum of the body. The other way this can happen is that person in the middle of that hub and spoke can also be a staff member. Typically, an employee of the commission or head of a department could, have conversations with a quorum of members of the body about an individual topic. And if they've had, one-on-one conversations with a quorum of the body, that too becomes a serial meeting. So I think these are kind of conceptually fairly straightforward to understand what they look like on paper, but in practice, they can be really complicated. So this is certainly an area, you should feel free to reach out to staff, and they can consult with the state attorney's office about, is this a proper communication? Can I send this email to one or more members of this task force? Things like that. They do get complicated. Sort of, you end up having to kind of count the number of members who've been contacted and really look at the nature of the communication to really determine whether a Brown Act violation has actually occurred. So when the Brown Act was initially passed in the 1950s, the ways in which people met were pretty limited. It was in person, it was by phone, it was by letter. There wasn't a lot of other technological means of communication that were coming into play. But now that we have emails and texts and social media, there's other ways in which the Brown Act can be triggered. And the tricky thing is the act has not necessarily been updated routinely over the years. So there's constantly kind of new situations, new scenarios where it's not clear, it sort of surprises people that, there's a Brown Act issue there. So one of those is just a group email. You may notice, when you receive an email from staff about task force matters, you'll often be, instead of having everyone on the to line to the email, everyone will be BCC'd. And that's a preventative measure to make sure folks aren't accidentally replying all to the whole body, right? So you could imagine a situation where you just send a question to city staff, maybe about a topic that's going to come up, but you've just replied all to the whole committee or the whole task force, and now everyone's on this conversation chain that could potentially become a Brown Act violation. And now, just this past year, the legislature decided that, I guess that coronavirus lockdown didn't present enough challenges in terms of the Brown Act. They wanted to pass additional rules about social media. So basically, there's recent legislation passed that went into effect beginning of this year about using social media. And basically, it says that you can communicate with the public through social media, but you can't engage with the content of other members of your legislative body. So you can't comment on, share, or like the content that other people have posted. So this is a little stricter than I think a regular reading of the Brown Act would point to, because you can have a one-on-one conversation with a member of the legislative body, So why can't you have that conversation, in the comments section of a tweet, right? So the language of this law is pretty strictly written. I think we're still kind of digesting or evaluating how it applies to everyday practices. It's kind of brand new. But the safest approach is to, for now, refrain from interacting with other members of the task force on social media. So those are kind of serial meetings issues. You should feel free to reach out to staff, reach out to the city attorney's office with questions about how to navigate those. They can be quite tricky. There's a few things that are clearly accepted from a meeting. I mentioned individual contacts. You can always talk to one other member about an issue, but you do need to look out for this serial meetings situation, right? You do look out for whether that member's already had a bunch of conversations with other people about the same topic, or you've already had a bunch of conversations outside of a meeting about the same topic. So that's kind of an area where you're generally free to have one or two of you conversing on a topic, but just be on the lookout. Also attending conferences or other open and public meetings, either hosted by a private person or an organization. Once at some point we'll be able to do that again. If a majority of the task force attends a policy conference or a organization's meeting, and they're invited to speak on a matter, you're allowed to participate in that agenda. You're allowed to participate and speak as part of that event, but you cannot be off to the side having conversations amongst yourselves about issues. The same goes for social, ceremonial meetings. And then, meetings of other bodies is another area that comes up quite a bit, particularly where, members of a commission might show up to a city council meeting to present or, provide thoughts on a topic. Maybe a commission has sent a proposal to council and, the council wants to ask the commissioners questions. Well, a quorum, a majority of them can attend that event, but they just have to, attend as observers, or they, someone can attend, but they can only participate as part of the, the scheduled meeting. So those are kind of the areas that come up when you're, engaging in meetings that aren't part of the task force, but there still might be a quorum of you there. So another area to look out for. Closed session. I don't know that this body will have cause to go into closed session, but maybe it will happen. The Brown Act basically says there's a handful of specific times a city council or a commission can meet in closed session. They don't have to allow the public to attend, and they're very specific, exceptions. They're, in litigation, if there's existing litigation or the city's been threatened to be sued about something, personnel negotiations, discuss bargaining discussions with city unions, real estate negotiations. There's kind of these discrete areas. I don't know the task force will have them come up, but if they do, the item still needs to be agendized. It still needs to be kind of generally identified, though it doesn't have to go into great detail about a litigation matter or something like that. So there are limited circumstances in which a body can meet in closed session. And then lastly, enforcement. There's just kind of what happens if, let's say, a chain email has gone around to the whole task force and you've all discussed something, or you realize you thought there were only a handful of you having a conversation, but actually it was a quorum, and now there's been a violation. So what exactly happens? The main thing is some kind of cure and correct process. Often, someone will identify a Brown Act issue and they'll send a letter to the city saying, this body violated the Brown Act. I have the emails to prove that a quorum of them, chatted about this, a week before the meeting, and they violated the Brown Act. So there's usually steps at that stage that you can take to cure the violation. If there's written communications, those can be published. If a decision or discussion was had outside of a meeting, it kind of has to be repeated at a meeting. There's different kind of things that the Brown Act allows you to do to fix a mistake, but that's only if they're caught. And then there's also a complaint process through the city's Open Government Commission. The Open Government Commission can review Brown Act complaints It can recommend, the city council takes certain action. There's lawsuits, and then the law allows in egregious cases for criminal action to be taken. I think one of the things that is, a risk with a Brown Act violation is that it invalidates the action taken. So if there is a serious Brown Act violation and a lawsuit happens, a court could say, well, this, there was such a serious Brown Act violation here that the actual decision made by the body was invalid. So that kind of underscores the importance of, sticking to the rules, checking with staff about, is this a proper communication, and making sure that, generally, you're handling business in the context of publicly noticed meetings. So that's really it. I think, I'm happy to take some questions now. I can certainly make my contact information available for more in-depth questions. Certainly, I think, Brown Act issues are tricky in that they're often very case specific, specific to the facts of the moment. But you should feel free to reach out to us, through staff to get any questions answered you need.
I believe we have one question from Commissioner Harger.
Thank you. So I have a question about the social media policies. I already follow some of my fellow commissioners on social media. So if, say, temporary chair Mizell were to post something on his personal social media unrelated to this commission and I liked it, would that be in violation of the Brown Act?
I think for now, the safest approach is to refrain from doing that. I think, I think that's the safest approach. It's a little unclear, as you can imagine, when the state legislature writes something about social media, by the time they've published it, it's already kind of outdated and not up to speed with kind of how social media works. But I think that's the safest approach for now. I think we're gonna probably aim to provide some more clear guidance and in the future for how to engage with content. But the like, expressing a like is not, it may not be sort of in-depth discussion, but it is an expression of opinion on something, right? And it is an expression of validating someone's position. And you could imagine someone saying, well, I think tomorrow I'm going to be in support of this proposal, and then a bunch of members like that, all of a sudden you've kind of reached an agreement outside the context of the meeting. So the safest approach is to just refrain from kind of all interaction for now. But you can certainly follow and read, and that stuff. Yeah.
Commissioner Opton.
I have a couple of questions. Let me start with this one. Let's say you're a member of a committee or group of with 10 members. Do I understand that it's okay to talk with, say, one of the other members about something that's on the committee business?
Yes, you can have individual communications with one member.
Mm-hmm. Well, 6 members would be a majority. Well, how about if you talk with 4 of them?
Yeah, you can have a conversation with less than a majority. I think that the issue is, once you get closer to that potential majority, does someone have one more conversation and then push you over the edge?
Yeah. And is there a class of things that it's okay to talk about, even with a majority of people, such as should we propose to change our meeting from next week to the week after next?
Right. So there are some exceptions for simply procedural questions. I think the best approach is to have those run through, staff, so through the secretary who, poll the commission. That's generally the practice. That is arguably not something that's in the subject matter jurisdiction of the body. It's not really substantively, but generally the best approach is to have those conversations run through a staff member. But those procedural kind of questions are obviously a little bit less risky, but nonetheless, following the staff's practice of emailing everyone and rescheduling is the best approach.
Yeah. Then I have a question about the enforcement of the Brown Act. We know that some laws are enforced much more stringently than others. Say, driving the wrong way down a one-way street is maybe not a good idea because you're likely to get in trouble. But if you say walk across the street in the middle of the block, that's violating a municipal code, but you're unlikely to get in serious trouble for it. Can you tell us something about how that principle applies to the many ways that the Brown Act can be technically violated?
Sure. I mean, I would say that Brown Act issues can generally be resolved by a body or by, the city if it's identified early enough, right? So without sort of going through a broader civil trial, civil judicial process or administrative, hearing process. I think it speaks to the importance of kind of identifying those issues early because they can be remedied, right? They can be fixed early on, the sooner you identify them. So that's kind of what I would say to that. In order for a criminal prosecution to happen, there would need to be sort of knowing willful violation of the Brown Act rather than sort of just accidental, CCing of people on an email. But it is possible.
Do you know how long it's been, if ever, that someone in the city of Berkeley government and its committees and commissions got in trouble about violating the Brown Act?
So, I think Brown Act issues come up pretty frequently, at least in terms of being raised, questions about how to proceed or raising potential violations quite frequently. I would say it's, I don't know a specific number or fact. I think, generally, city officials have been pretty proactive, at least the ones, we see in our office. They're city officials being proactive about, can I have this conversation? Can I go to this meeting I have scheduled tomorrow? Or I just had a phone call, was this really proper? So I would say generally, things get addressed before they would reach some kind of, stage where some remedial action is needed.
Well, I've lived in Berkeley, I think 57 years, and I can't remember when I've heard about a Brown Act problem in the city government, but it may have escaped my attention. Have you?
Well, there's certainly, I think, procedural steps that can be taken that have been taken if a communication needs to be published as part of a agenda packet or something like that to make it public. But I haven't, really seen, big violations that kind of, arose and resulted in a big, derailment of a public process.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lutzker.
Hi, I'm just wondering if someone can clarify what a quorum is on this particular commission. Thanks. The number.
It would be 9 of the 17 members.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fine.
Yeah, one of the things that's helpful for me is, you have the communication that can go around within the 17-member body. But outside of that, the place that I think it's really appropriate on social media that's going to be important is community engagement. I just got a call before this one. I'm in the LGBT community and I work, connect with the bailiff, San Francisco Bay Area lawyers. And they've got a Facebook group, they've got a Facebook page, they have the LinkedIn, the weekly newsletter, the law students, the website, the membership directories, all these ways to support outreach, to get people involved in order to bring their thoughts to the community engagement process. And that way, there's no Brown issue there because it's directed outward to get people involved who are not part of the 17-member body. it's like when we start getting involved among ourselves and can't keep track of what's going on a topic, then I think we're headed into trouble. And we sort of have to need to distinguish between what types of communications are appropriate and what ones could get us in trouble in not sharing the conversations with the group, with the public.
Mr. Harvey, are you with us? Have any response?
Yeah, so yeah, I think that raises a good kind of framework for thinking about, distinguishing between, permissible, outwardly focused social media communications and, communications that are between members of the task force.
Thank you. Commissioner Malvito.
Hey, folks. Labor this. I know that many of my elders in this call already would probably answer this question easily. But in the context of working in the community already, many of us work in coalition with some folks that are on this call. And on the subject of policing in particular. And to me, that I guess is a question that's in the back of my mind when it comes to working in coalition. If there are some members on, let's say, a general meeting call, where they might not be part of the executive body or the steering committee, but they're still very much there, and the subject is policing. It might not necessarily be what's happening at the Reimagine Public Safety Task Force, but again, it is policing. And I'm wondering, just trying to stay on the safe side. I know there is that thing on social media of like not liking things or what have you, but what is a protocol, I guess? Is this allowable to be able to discuss policing in general? Is it just subject matter that's agendized or not agendized, I guess, related to this task force and their work? That's just something that's in the back of my mind. As I know, I work with Commissioner Chima and others on this call outside of this task force.
Yeah, I think that scenario you brought up raises some good questions. I mean, I think, as a threshold matter, right, if it's not a quorum, it's not an issue. I think generally an outside organization meeting would likely fall under one of those Brown Act exceptions, particularly if, one member is just speaking in the context of the meeting. But it is a setting in which, a Brown Act violation could occur. You can imagine some kind of, meeting of another organization in which one or two members of the task force are really engaged and are making comments, and then a quorum is also present and sort of engaged in that process. So it is, it's a tricky one. And off the top of my head, I don't know that I can say decisively where the line is. I think it would depend on the circumstances. So that, that's a helpful one to bring up, and certainly one I'd encourage you to run by staff, run by us if if you're going to encounter situations like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Harvey, I can ask Mr. Harvey, I'll email you because I talk about policing quite often in a lot of different circumstances, so we'll have to have a longer conversation on that. Commissioner Harger?
Yeah, I suppose this could also be an email, but I feel like it's good to get it on the record. I'm involved with the Berkeley Community Safety Coalition, so this is like a very specific example, as is Commissioner Hector Malvito. And so we will likely at some point be talking about policing, talking specifically about this commission. If quorum is not present, is that okay?
Yeah, so if it's a one-on-one or communication like that, that's fine. As long as it doesn't spiral into a quorum communicating outside the meeting.
Commissioner Fine?
One thing that has occurred to me in participating with the Mental Health Commission over almost 4 years is that we have subcommittees, and that is the way for people to get together between meetings in a public forum where it's noticed and have that opportunity to have a full discussion and not do anything to disrupt our compliance with the Brown Act. So what I'm wondering, are we going to have subcommittee meetings so that we aren't always having to try to figure out whether or not we're violating the Brown Act, but actually have somewhere for a formal discussion process between Reimagining public safety task force meetings?
Yeah, Commissioner, I'll take that question. Well, it would be up to the commission, but I would certainly think yes, that assuming the commission's fine with it, we will have subcommittees. I think it will be a necessity given just the sheer amount of topics we will cover on this task force. And I think our presentations today will help prime us into thinking where would we want a subcommittee, and we should hopefully by next meeting be ready to set those up and really hit the ground running.
Thank you for that.
All righty. Well, thank you, Mr. Harvey. Certainly appreciate the presentation, and certainly will be emailing any questions as we go along.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing from you all, and thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Okay, commissioners, next on the agenda is the election of permanent chair. We as a task force do not have any standing rules on how to conduct the election, but I would think the most appropriate way would be to have commissioners have the opportunity to nominate the person or self-nominate. If a commissioner receives a second, then the entire body will consider that nomination. I think it would be appropriate that that nominee would have, a minute to talk about why they want to be permanent chair, and on our next item, why we want to be vice chair, and then we will vote, and the candidate with most votes wins. Does that sound acceptable to everyone? Commissioner Fine?
We can't hear you.
I apologize. I didn't take my hand down.
I just want to quickly interject, Chair Mizell, you may just want to consider when you will want to take public comment in this portion of the agenda, whether you want to do it first or you want to do it after nominations. Just wanted to make sure that was on your radar screen.
Yes, thank you. Now, what do folks think would be better for the public? To comment now and have, I guess, a chance to comment potentially on the chair or vice chair, or comment later and have the opportunity to respond to what has been presented from various city staff and National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. I'm leaning more towards the latter. Is there any objections to that? Okay, Mr. Wright, can we place it after we go through our action items?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Commissioner Upton. Excuse me, Commissioner Upton. Maybe just left his hand up.
So if we must nominate a permanent chairman at this point, I wish we didn't have to do it now when we're still strangers to one another for the most part. But if we have to, I would like to nominate Punachima.
Okay, there's a nomination of Commissioner Chima to be permanent chair of the task force. Commissioner Chima, do you accept that? Well, excuse me, we'll need a second before we can get to that part. Sorry.
This is Commissioner Malvido. I second that.
We have a second. Commissioner Chima, do you accept that nomination?
I think I was pretty clear at the last meeting that the nature of the times and where we are in history, that Nathan, when you nominated yourself, I felt that it was a good decision to have you as the chair, as you know, an emerging leader with a great future. I would be happy to self-nominate or have my wonderful friends nominate me for vice chair. And so once we get through that, through this, then
Thank
so I
you,
guess that
Commissioner.
means I'm not available for chair, but I am available for vice chair.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Harger.
To withdraw my nomination in view of what Ms. Shima has said.
Thank you. Commissioner Harger.
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Malvito.
Is there a second?
This is Commissioner Dangerfield. I would second that nomination.
We have a second from Commissioner Dangerfield. Commissioner Malvito, do you accept that nomination?
I'm honored, but I'm unfortunately not able to. I would love to see Nathan as chair as well. I think he has the qualities that we need in this table. And I also love to see Commissioner Chima as vice chair.
Yeah, I would like to nominate Nathan Mazel for chair of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force.
I second that one.
Thank you. We have a motion to nominate myself in a second.
Second by Walker. Second by Walker.
Yeah, second by
Yeah.
Commissioner Walker. Yeah. I will accept the nomination graciously and thank you for those of you who are willing to place your trust in me in this process. I know it will be quite substantive and a lot of work, and inevitably there will be disagreement in this process, but we will get through it. And if I am ultimately elected chair, I will do my best to make sure all of the many aspects we have to cover are covered to their fullest extent, and that, you know, we can all hopefully walk out of here feeling like we've accomplished something important. Are there any other nominations for permanent chair? Okay, seeing none, I believe we still have to vote. So someone other than you will probably have to motion to vote in a second.
Motion to vote.
I second the motion.
Okay, hold on one second. So who made the motion to vote? Harger?
Yes.
And it was Commissioner
Thank
Dangerfield
you.
who seconded the motion.
Thank you. You want to take roll call, Shamika?
Sure. Commissioner Fine.
Yes.
Commissioner Chima.
Enthusiastic, yes.
Commissioner Dangerfield.
Aye.
Commissioner Hyde.
Yes.
Commissioner Harger.
Absolutely yes.
Commissioner Linheim.
Yes.
Commissioner Walker.
Yes.
Commissioner Ghosh.
Yes, and thank you, Commissioner Mizell, for stepping up.
Commissioner Ichigu.
Yes.
Commissioner Opton.
Yes.
Commissioner Blake. Commissioner Blake is recorded as yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Polk.
Yes.
Commissioner Malvito.
Yes.
Temporary Chair Mizell.
Yes.
Commissioner Diaz,
Yes.
Commissioner Lutzker,
Yes.
Commissioner Ho,
Yes, thank you.
so that concludes the vote. We have 16 yes and 1 aye. Actually, 17 yes. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. Well appreciated. And thank you, commissioners, for this true honor. Now we'll move on to item 6 on the agenda, election of a vice chair. Same rules as just before. Are there any motions to nominate? I will motion to nominate Commissioner Chima to the position of vice chair of the commission. There's probably a million reasons why she's overqualified to be vice chair, if anything. So I'll place that nomination.
I second that.
I'll second it.
We'll give it to Commissioner Malvito. I think he came in first. Commissioner Chima, do you accept that nomination?
Yes, I do.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Chima accepts the nomination. Are there any other motions to nominate? Seeing none, Commissioner Harder.
I also support Commissioner Chima, but I also would like to nominate myself. I'm really passionate about this, and so throw my name out there, throw my name in the ring.
I would second that nomination. This is Commissioner Dangerfield.
Thank you. We have a nomination for Commissioner Harger and a second for Commissioner Dangerfield. Are there any other nominations at this time? Okay, seeing none, as we proceed, and Mr. White, correct me if I'm wrong, this will be 2 straight up and down votes. So a vote for Commissioner Chima to be vice chair, yay or nay, and then a vote for Commissioner Harger up and down, yay or nay. And at the end of it, who turns out with more yays will be the vice chair.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. White. I will motion to call the vote for Commissioner Chima to be vice chair of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force.
Will I do the roll call, Schmick? You want me to do it?
Yes, I'm ready.
I'll need a second. Sorry, I'll need a second.
So we had a second from the to vote.
Oh, my apologies. Yeah, let's vote.
Sorry to interject, but since there are 2 of us, I feel like it might be beneficial to, I don't know if it goes against our rules, but for us to describe our qualifications or why we want to be vice chair, since it's, there are 2 people and we are all kind of strangers still.
Oh, completely appropriate, Commissioner. Yeah. So do we already have the motion on the floor to vote?
Yes, we had you moved to vote, but we did not have a second.
Okay, I'll resend my motion to vote so we can continue discussion. I guess which commissioner, if interested, would like to give us a few minutes about themselves and their qualifications for the position? I guess Commissioner Harger.
Thank you. No longer temporary chairperson myself. Congratulations. As was said, my name is Alicia. I am a lifelong Berkeley resident. I'm very passionate about policing and police reform. I've been learning, studying, dedicating myself to policing since high school, and I've continued that through my college education. As I said, I'm a lifelong Berkeley resident. I'm deeply tied to the city. I have a deep understanding of policing in this city. both through my own experiences and through experiences of others, which I very intentionally worked to gather throughout my time. My time as a adult person, I've been working hard to collect experiences and understandings from other people such that my perspective is not just coming from myself, but from my community as a whole. What I lack in experience in commissions, I think I make up for in a willingness to learn. And I would be very, very excited to work with and under Chairperson Mizell. And I do have experience with facilitating large meetings, moderating large meetings, never under a Brown Act format, but I do have a lot of experience with that. Yeah, I'm really passionate about this. I'm super charged up. I'm ready to give 150% of myself to this. So I would appreciate your votes. And again, also Commissioner Chima is a fantastic option.
Thank you so much. I am very, very committed to making sure that the work that we do is deep and wide, has breadth and depth, that we engage with the community in a way that the community has not had an opportunity to engage with our electeds or with even our commissions sometimes. I take my commitment to this city and to making it a better place for all of us, but especially for people who have been left behind, who've been brutalized, who've been disregarded and sometimes not seen. What I bring to the table is, of course, experience, but also a point of view that has developed over many, many, many years of doing this work. And I know this work is going to be tough. It's going to be difficult. And that at times we're going to have discussions and that might be sometimes difficult to manage. I am a skilled peacemaker and a facilitator. I think I bring skills that would complement our chairperson skills, and that as a team, we would do a really, really excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Fine?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I came back here 4 years ago, having grown up here, and my mom is still here, and I met Buna, who is just this extraordinary mentor. And when you meet somebody like this who really has committed to more than 5 decades working with different city councils and different commissions and different task forces and 38 years with BOSS. I mean, I just can't see a better person who has that aerial landscape and yet very much detailed information about specific CBOs and the government. I feel like we would be very, very fortunate to have her as our vice chair, and just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Commissioner. And we are still in discussion. So if any other commissioners have anything like to say, this will be the time. Give it a minute. Okay, Commissioner Harker.
Sorry, I just realized that I only got through a couple of the bullet points that I wrote down before I stopped speaking. So I just want to say one other thing, which is that I think that the perspective of queer people is not always considered when we're talking about policing, and that's very important to me. Queer bodies, and particularly trans bodies and queer people of color, are heavily policed in our community and in this country. And I think it's really important that those voices shine through. And I also am very embedded in the local queer community, and I really care about queer people and how we are policed. And I think that that perspective is something that I can bring, but also something that I can bring people here, like literally bringing my people and my community to this table, which I will do regardless of if I'm vice chair. So
I'm certain. Sorry, Commissioner Fine, was that from before, or do you have another comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I have received unwavering support from Buna Chima in the LGBT arena, including recent presentation before the council a few weeks ago to describe the importance of having LGBT people part of the community engagement for our policing reforms. And I've been an activist for over 30 years. So I'm also just want to express my feeling that she's very committed to very different groups of people and very sincere in trying to ensure that everybody has a fair process and that we can work towards a real wonderful model of community policing.
Thank you, Commissioner. Seeing no other hands, I'll motion to begin the vote on the nomination of Commissioner Chima to the position of Vice Chair of the task force.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. We have a second. And yeah, Ms. Cole, if you can call the roll, please.
Sure. Commissioner Fine,
Wait, hold on. Are we just
This
taking
is
roll
a-
call on the motion on the vote?
Wait, can
Right.
you read the motion?
Thank you. So the motion right now that's on the table is the motion to vote for a permanent vice chair. So the motion was by Chair Mizell, temporary Chair Mizell, and the second was by Commissioner Ejigu.
Yes, and I made a motion for this vote for Commissioner Chima.
Now,
As we'll need 2 votes.
thank you.
So we're voting on Buna Chima. Oh.
Thank you.
Yes.
Clarify. So everyone, this is a vote for the election of Commissioner Chima for vice chair. Commissioner Fine,
Yes.
Commissioner Chima,
Yes.
Commissioner Dangerfield,
May I please abstain from that vote?
noted. Commissioner Hyde,
Yes.
Commissioner Harger,
Abstain.
Commissioner Leonheim,
Yes.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
Commissioner Walker,
Yes.
Commissioner Ghosh,
Yes.
Commissioner Ejigu,
Yes.
Commissioner Opton,
Yes.
Commissioner Blake,
Yes.
Commissioner Polk,
Yes.
Commissioner Malvito,
Yes.
Chair Mizell,
Yes.
Commissioner Diaz,
Yes.
Commissioner Letzker,
Yes.
Commissioner Ho. Commissioner Ho?
I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
I'd like to abstain.
Noted. So the vote is, the majority is now in favor of Commissioner Chima as vice chair.
Thank you. Procedurally, we have to take another vote for Commissioner Harger. So I will motion for that vote on the nomination of Commissioner Harger to be vice chair of the task force.
I second.
second.
Thank you. So now we will vote on Commissioner Harger as Vice Chair of the task force. Commissioner Fine,
No.
Commissioner Chima,
Commissioner Chima, you're muted.
I said it kind of breaks my heart, but I have to say no.
Commissioner Dangerfield,
Yes.
Commissioner Hyde,
Ms. Hyde, no.
Commissioner Harger,
Yes.
Commissioner Linheim,
No.
Commissioner Walker,
Yes.
Commissioner Ghosh,
Abstain.
Commissioner Ejigu,
Abstain.
Commissioner Opton,
No.
Commissioner Blake,
Yes.
Commissioner Polk,
Yes.
Commissioner Malvito,
Yes.
Chair Mizell,
Yes.
Commissioner Diaz,
Yes.
Commissioner Lutzker,
Abstain.
and Commissioner Ho.
Yes.
Give me 1 second. So the motion did not pass.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. Buna, Commissioner Chima, Vice Chair Chima, you are the Vice Chair of the
Thank you very
Reimagining
much.
Public Safety Task Force.
Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you, everyone. Moving to our next item on the agenda, the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force meeting schedule. Would this be you, Mr. White, or?
So happy to help facilitate on this. We've been sort of brainstorming internally based on the reactions we got to this meeting. So one thought that we had is to establish a regular meeting on the second Thursday of the month. So we would have something that would revolve around that date. If it is also more convenient, we could also try to circulate some kind of poll as well and do that offline and come up with dates. But that's kind of our initial thinking based on some of the reactions we got to trying to do the second or third for March.
All right, so the second Thursday going forth, same time?
Yeah, starting at 6 o'clock. I do have some ideas about having a special meeting in April because of some of the timing and scheduling that I'd like to raise after we establish a regular meeting date. But I'll wait on that until to see if the second Thursday works.
Okay, commissioners have any comments on that?
On which part, the running meeting or the special sessions?
The running meeting.
I would, if there's a motion for the second Thursday, I would support that.
Okay, Commissioner Harger?
Yeah, in the past meeting, I and at least one other commissioner expressed concerns about the tightness of this timeline and having a single meeting per month. And I was wondering, is there a reason why we are not having bi-monthly meetings?
I'll defer that to Mr. White.
Well, I do think we are going to need some additional meetings, and I think at a minimum, we want to make sure that we have one monthly meeting established, although April is going to prove to be a little bit of a challenge. And I think the pragmatic part is you're just dealing with staffing constraints on our end to be able to staff multiple meetings a month.
Okay, thank you, Mr. White. Yeah, one thing will probably be critical in our next meeting is to have the agendized to begin setting up subcommittees. And then we can really help facilitate the work and not have to wait for a meeting once a month. Any other comments on the second Thursday timeline, commissioners?
I do have a question. Hi, this
Yes.
is Commissioner Ho. Is there going to be a general, what is the expectation for each meeting in terms of time? It would really help me because I have little ones. So my partner can know how long I'm going to be offline for.
Yeah, I've, in my mind, coming from the PRC, I've been hoping to get it to 3 hours. I don't know how other commissioners feel about that, but my goal for these meetings will be to get us out by 9. And if this means we have to go past that, then hopefully that'll be agendized and we can discuss that beforehand. Commissioner Blake?
I personally would be willing to meet an extra hour, but more than anything, I want to express my concern, as I've heard 2 other people express concern. This is a very important step that we're taking, and I feel very pressured on the time. And I would hope that we would have more meetings or lengthen our current schedule of meetings. I do support a Thursday meeting. Thanks.
If I may interject, what I would strongly suggest for the task force is to land on a regular meeting date. And as we go through our work, we will be very flexible to accommodate additional meetings as necessary. But I would not want to see the group get bogged down in concern about the number of meetings at the moment, because we'd like to establish a specific date and time that we can move forward on. And as we go through the presentations tonight, you will hear us talk about the timeline going forward, so we understand the need to be flexible. And so you will hear about that as well. So I really like to urge, see if we can land on a specific regular meeting date. If not, we can take it offline and try to do a scheduling.
Commissioner Fine?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I think we will be able to arrive at what regular or special or subcommittee meetings we need to happen. I think the big issue is, and I was just listening to this voting that kind of got, very close, is we have major topics like talking about racial identity and how it impacts diverse groups, because we have very diverse people involved in this. And underlying it, we have people with disabilities and mental health and LGBT. And I think that's kind of what's the elephant in the room. And when we get to community engagement, we can talk about that, but it will generate, I think, in some ways, a sense of the kinds of meetings we need, the kinds of leadership and so forth. So once I think we get into the content, it starts to reveal where more of the work is and how we're going to generate those opportunities to get it done.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Commissioner. Certainly, once we get to the presentations, we'll have a better idea. Commissioner Chima, Vice Chair Chima. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you for reminding me of that. The structure that has worked really well for many of the commissions is to, we already know that we're going to have subcommittees, because as a full commission, we cannot do all of the work as a full commission. And as we decide what are the critical areas, not just around community engagement, but also around, writing, creating policy. There's going to be so much work making recommendations from subgroups. So one of the processes I've been looking at very closely is what has been happening in Oakland with the reimagining work that they have done. They did a number of focus groups. They also had areas of expertise, or I can't remember what they called them, but people went off and did work within the communities that they are part of, and then they brought the work back. And that's where I believe the work of the full commission is, to review the work of the clusters. And so in that sense, we will be having many meetings when we're out in the community and bringing in many, many voices into this whole task force. So I think we should agree on our permanent meeting that once a month, and then see how the breakouts happen in terms of how we're going to go out and engage. And there might be some commissioners who want to, cluster around a particular issue. There might be other commissioners that want to reach out to different community or work on the budget or work on looking at the reports. And I thought we had a presentation by our auditor tonight. But if we don't, that's okay. But we're going to have so much to look at and so much information to go through that I think a lot of that is going to have to get sorted in the subcommittees or subgroups, whatever we call them, and then their recommendations coming to the full commission. So my recommendation is that we get our permanent date, and then let's get to work.
Agreed. I will motion to accept the second Thursday of the month, starting at 6 p.m. as our regular meeting time.
I second that.
The second from Commissioner Malvito. Ms. Cohen, you're ready.
Thank you.
I guess, are there any objections? I think we can. Seeing none, we have unanimous consent for the second Thursday for our permanent meeting. Thank you, everyone. And as Vice Chair Shima mentioned, there's a lot to do. We'll have to have a lot of discussion in terms of how we break up subcommittees, but that is forthcoming. Okay, we are moving to item 8 on our agenda. The City of Berkeley Reimagining Public Safety Overview. Mr. White and Ms.
So
Cole.
we need to,
Sorry?
we need to vote. We need to vote on the second Thursday. We need to vote on the
okay.
second Thursday.
Does unanimous consent work, or do we have to take a roll call?
I believe we have to take a roll call. But if our attorney is still in the room, they can advise us.
The rules are slightly different with Zoom, so is Mr. Harvey here? If not, we can just take a roll call vote to be sure.
Thank you.
Okay, let's call the roll then.
Commissioner Fine,
Yes.
Commissioner Chima,
Yes.
Commissioner Dangerfield,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mr. Harger,
Yes.
Mr. Leanheim,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Commissioner Ghosh,
Yes.
Commissioner Ijigu,
Yes.
Commissioner Opton,
Yes.
Commissioner Blake,
Yes.
Commissioner Polk, thank you. Commissioner Malvito,
Yes.
Commissioner Mizell, I'm
Yes.
sorry, Chair Mizell, thank you. Commissioner Diaz,
Yes.
Commissioner Lutzker,
Yes.
Commissioner Ho.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. And thanks for getting the meeting time, everyone. I'm moving to item 8 now. The public safety overview from Mr. White and Ms. Cole.
Thank you. And before we jump in, Chair Mizell, I do want to point out on the agenda, if you have any pleasure in this, I know our city auditor is on the call, and I don't want to speak too much for her, but I know 100% that, there will be no calls for service analysis. She's got the work in process, and that will probably be most appropriate for a special meeting date that I will talk with you offline about wanting to establish. So I don't know if we want to just give a few minutes to our city auditor to just give us a brief update, but I know for sure that the real meat of this conversation tonight will be between the presentation from Shamika, myself, and Mr. Muhammad and his team. So I just want to put that out there for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. White. Yes, if the city auditor's here and just give us the brief overview, that would be great.
And Jenny, I hope you didn't put you on the spot, but I know you, I know we've talked a lot offline, so. We can't hear you.
Yeah. City auditor, Madam Chair, we still can't hear you, unfortunately. Yeah, your mic doesn't appear to be muted, but we can't hear you, so maybe some audio. No, I still can't hear you, unfortunately. Sorry, Sarah, we cannot hear you, unfortunately.
I'm texting her to see if she will respond. Let's give her a.
I know sometimes my computer does that too. And what fixes it is just jumping off and jumping back on.
We can go through our presentation, Chair Mizell, we're prepared. So while our auditor Wong figures it out.
Okay, yeah, so let's move to the presentation then.
Great. So just to quickly introduce this, this was something that we had prepared, and I'll share my screen to just really help frame for everyone on this task force the scope of the omnibus package that our council adopted last July, and to help provide some perspective around all the work that is going on around the task force and that is in process, and to help put and set in context where the task force, based on the enabling legislation, is situated vis-a-vis the work of Mr. Muhammad and the National Institute of Criminal Justice Reform. So we have a very brief presentation. I'll take the first part of it, and then I will pass it over to Co-Secretary Cole. So let me share my screen for you.
Mr. White, looks like the city auditor's rejoined us. Would you mind if we can hear from her before we start?
Absolutely. I don't want to keep her too late, so no problem.
No worries. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. Sorry about the blue lighting. So we are working on the calls for service data. I had, maybe the best thing to do is just to share with you all that we are hoping to finish around mid to late April. So I believe Mr. White is trying to, I think he's suggesting perhaps that we come back for a special meeting at the end of April to share our analysis with you all. But we're really excited. We're finalizing a lot of this work, which will touch upon the police-related events that come through the calls for service data, as well as police-initiated stops. So I'll just stop there and turn it back to you.
Yes, thank you, Madam City Auditor. Certainly, I think we'll all be looking forward to your analysis for the calls of service, and I'm sure we'll all seriously consider that special meeting. Okay, yeah, Mr. White, if you're ready to resume, thank you.
Absolutely. Let me share this presentation. All right, is that showing through?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Even though I'm an old man, I've mastered technology. So let me just quickly go through the way this is framed. And certainly both Shamik and myself are happy to respond to any questions after we get through this. And again, the purpose of this presentation is just to set some context really in terms of what Council adopted and how the work is moving forward. So back in July of last year, our City Council adopted an omnibus package really directing the organization to move forward on a number of different initiatives designed to reimagine public safety. And in order to meet that challenge, we have really set up a very comprehensive work plan, really under the direction and leadership of our city manager. And so when you look at this slide here, what you can see is the different elements of that omnibus package laid out in terms of where they are residing in responsibility. So as you all are well aware, our city auditor was asked to perform a calls for service analysis, and under her leadership, she's been working very closely with our police department to aggregate all the data and is working very hard on a report that will help to provide that analysis for this body to consider. And part of the work of the National Institute of Criminal Justice Reform will be to lift off and build off of that work for purposes of helping us move forward in developing that model of community safety. Our city attorney is leading work around performing an analysis of claims and settlements, and under her leadership, her team is working on that. Certainly when the time is right, we'd love to have her come to this commission to provide some guidance and results of the analysis that she's spearheading. To the meat of the work, there are really 4 different efforts underway, and I'll save the best for last, which is us. I'll talk a little bit about the priority dispatching piece that is being led by our fire department, and they're working with really the police department as well. And the goal of that is to help design a new model of dispatching in the community, whereby we are not just necessarily putting out all the resources with every call that comes in, but that we have a dispatch service that is able and competent to really deploy the right resources for the right call. So our Fire Chief Brannigan has been convening a lot of internal meetings in developing this model of dispatching. Under his leadership, we have issued will be issuing a request for a proposal to bring someone on board to help design that dispatching system. And that should go out the door probably early next week. And certainly our fire chief would be more than happy to come to this commission and talk about that work. Another big body of work is BERCDOT, so that is establishing a Department of Transportation, really infused with a racial justice lens. And that work is being led by our Public Works Director, Liam Garland. And to date, our Public Works Director has provided 2 presentations, one to the Transportation Commission and one to the Public Works Commission, on really starting to lay the foundation and framework for what that Department of Transportation could be and the options for it. And we could certainly have him as well come to this commission to provide a status and update on what that looks like. Specialized Care Unit, this is something our council and many of the community have been hugely supportive of and really want to see come to fruition. This body of work is being spearheaded by our Health, Housing, and Community Services Director, Dr. Barhus, and she is working closely with the Mental Health Commission and a steering committee established under the Mental Health Commission to really help design a program to provide an alternative type of service to our community that wouldn't necessarily involve our police department, but is really designed to help respond to those types of mental health and other types of calls for help that come into our 911 system. They have a consultant on board, and Shamika will talk a little bit more about that. And they are well into the process of designing a community engagement process for that, as well as laying the foundation for developing that system. So like I said, I'm going to save the best for last, and that's us. And we've brought on the National Institute of Criminal Justice Reform, and they will be taking us through a lot of analysis and work to help develop a new model of community safety for the city of Berkeley. So as our city manager mentioned, she has really brought us all together, many different departments. We meet pretty much on a weekly basis, and you can see all the different departments that are coming together to support one another to help advance this body of work. Both Shamika and myself are responsible for convening our department heads, and the real goal is to make sure that we're coordinated and speaking together about what are the key challenges that we're facing and what we need to do to make sure that we are able to implement efficiently. So let's talk a little bit about the task force. I'm prayerful that many of you have read the enabling legislation for this task force itself. And as you can see, when you look at this slide, the way it's laid out, what this is just meant to help show is the actual composition of the body. And we had 9 members appointed by council, 1 member from the Police Review Commission, 1 member from the Youth Commission, Mental Health Commission, 1 member from the Berkeley Community Safety Coalition, and Associated Students of University of California, both of which were approved by our city council. And then 3 at-large members who are new to us this evening, Francis Ho, Liza Lutzker, and Alex Diaz as our at-large members. And as many of you are aware, you appointed them at our last meeting. So really what I want to make sure we have a chance to talk about is where this task force fits within the process. We function as a commission under our enabling legislation, but really the goal is to help support and provide input to and provide feedback to David Mohammed and his team, which has a very large amount of work that they have to accomplish. So in terms of the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, their contract was approved by council back in December. And we've been coordinating closely with David and his team. And you can see on this slide the body of work that they've been asked to do. So David will help to facilitate this task force and the work as it starts to unfold. He's been working very closely with our city auditor to help with the calls for service analysis, and you'll see the tremendous amount of detail and work that she has been spearheading. And I know that David will be lifting off from that once it's completed. One of the big bodies of work that we'll be talking about initially and seeking your input and feedback on are new and emerging models of community safety. And David will talk about that under his work plan. He's obviously responsible for coordinating with us, and we're here to support him. He's responsible for developing and implementing a communication strategy, and he's got a lot of work in process on that. You will hear tonight from his team about the community engagement process that they are about to embark on, and certainly seeking your feedback this evening. And then really after they have a chance to present on the new and emerging models of community safety, the next big piece of work is to help to identify programs and services that are currently provided by the Berkeley Police Department that could possibly be provided by other city departments or organizations. And then as we move through the process, and hopefully you've had a chance to look through his contract, he is responsible for developing a final report and implementation plan. And really when we engaged Mr. Mohammed and his team, as I've spoken with a few of you about, our interest in is not just having, a plan with a lot of recommendations that are hypothetical in nature. My real interest, particularly as someone who oversees a lot of the administrative functions of the organization, is to really have a plan that has a very specific implementation associated with it that includes timelines, dollars, and budget, so that really I have a good roadmap to move forward with. So this is just a graphical representation of the body of work that the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform has underneath them. And as you can see, the real focus is the task force will be working alongside David and his team, providing him input and feedback as their analysis moves forward. And we're lucky to have him and his team as experts in the field. I will now turn it over to our co-secretary, Shamika Cole, to take us through the rest of the presentation.
Thank
and
you.
Shamika, tell me when you want me to advance slides.
Thank you. So as Co-Secretary David White mentioned early on, the Specialized Care Unit is one of the elements to reimagining public safety in Berkeley. The Health, Housing, and Community Services Director, Dr. Varhus, is leading the work to develop a pilot program to reassign non-criminal police service calls to a specialized care unit, as you heard before. The effort encompasses an assessment of the current mental health system, deep community engagement, by which community members are asked to participate in the process of visioning an improved system. Also a deeper dive by looking at data and other best practice models. And if you look at this from a more simplified standpoint, next slide. The next slide. David.
I'm there, it's just not advancing. There we go.
Thank you. The next slide provides a bit more context about organizational structure, as Co-Secretary White mentioned before. Under the direction of the city manager, the Specialized Care Unit, in partnership with Resource Development Associates, the selected vendor, is leading a steering committee. The steering committee will work directly with RDA, or Resource Development Associates, on community engagement and ensuring completion of the scope of work, in addition to a lot of other elements that falls under that. As for operations, the team is charged with looking at the current system, exploring other systems, including a crisis response model or other models, and through community engagement, will develop a longer-term plan to assign non-criminal police calls to the Specialized Care Unit. Next slide. Another parallel effort, as mentioned before, is our BERCDOT. The goal for BERCDOT is to pursue a Department of Transportation centered around a racial justice lens in traffic enforcement and the development of transportation policy, programs, and infrastructure. Relative to analyzing the infrastructure, looking at relocating current service areas such as parking enforcement, traffic enforcement, and crossing guards, among a few. And also to identify and implement approaches to reduce and/or eliminate the practice of pretextual stops and minor traffic violations. And again, from a structural lens, the next slide, and the work looks like this. Under the direction of the city manager, advancing the work of BERCDOT includes working with a consultant, several city commissions, the community, and looking at operations from a number of different areas, among other collaborative efforts. Next slide. Our fire chief, David Brannigan, is leading the work to develop a plan for priority dispatching. This effort includes partnering with the consultant, and as David White mentioned before, they will be putting out an RFP for this work soon. And they'd like to really do a lot of work around considering placing dispatch in the fire department or elsewhere outside of the police department. They also plan to create plans and protocols for dispatch to send calls to another entity. They also want to achieve required accreditation for emergency medical dispatch and to create continuous quality assurance, improvement, and training plans and protocols around the work. Next slide. Structurally, again, from an organizational standpoint, we really wanted to bring this to a vision and have everybody understand, all of the work that's being done under each area. So for the priority dispatching element, under the direction of the city manager, we'll work with the consultant, engage the community, and work on redirecting dispatch 911 calls to a preferred entity that will be established later on. Next slide. And to provide an overview of the budget, of course. This slide outlines current funding allocations for Reimagining Public Safety in Berkeley. As you can see, the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform has a contract for $270,000. Resource Development Associates, who are currently working with the Specialized Care Unit effort, has a contract for $185,000. The Claims Settlement Analysis, led by our city attorney, has funding allocated, $25,000. BERCDOT currently has $75,000 allocated to that effort, as well as priority dispatching. So in total, our city council has prioritized over $630,000 in funding this important work. Thank you. And now Dave and I will take questions. Again, all of the priority areas are planning to come to the task force and make individual presentations to bring you a little bit more insight as to all the work that's being done in every area. So this structure overview that we provided is strictly a higher level overview for each of you.
Thank you, Shamika. So I just want to reinforce, we have, under our council's direction and leadership, have brought in a very experienced team, and you'll hear more from Mr. Muhammad and his team in a little bit about the work plan that they have. But we wanted to really share with you, we have brought in a group of experts to help really guide and shepherd this process, and really relying on all of you to help to shape and mold the plans and direction as it comes forward from Mr. Muhammad and his team as they bring in the community engagement piece and the various pieces of analysis that are demanded of us by the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. Questions, commissioners? Commissioner Harker?
Yeah, a student contacted me recently and is interested in getting involved with the specialized care unit. Is it too late for citizens or community members to join in on that effort?
It is not too late. They have established a steering committee, but certainly anyone from the public is able to participate. And I know that as they provide a community engagement process, that there will be opportunities for people to engage in that way.
Commissioner Lutzker?
Hi, thanks. I just want to say something that may seem like a semantic, make a comment that may seem semantic, but it's actually really important. In the presentation about BERCDOT, you listed one of the roles as accident investigation. And I just want to be really clear that that term is in fact really problematic, especially in this issue. Framing these as accidents makes it seem like there's nothing that we can do to prevent these from happening. And in fact, much like all of the other topics that we're covering here, investment in our community and building infrastructure and making our streets safe can actually help us move forward in a way that actually reduces the need for police. And so collision or crash is really an important term to use, and using the word accident is really just making it seem like it's just something that we can't avoid. So I would really appreciate if city staff moving forward, and I would love also if my fellow commissioners could recognize that that's an important and not just a small issue. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. You're completely correct. Any other questions, hands, commissioners? Okay, I'll ask a question then. So first, thank you for the broad overlay and layout of the different really entities and projects that are going on. In terms of each coming for a presentation, has there been any discussion into when we would see folks from these different projects? whether it's, Ian Garland or Chief Brannigan, is the thought process that we will, I guess, first, has there been any thought in that first? We'll go from there.
So we have had active discussions about wanting to bring people forward, and I think folks are, particularly around the BERT piece, our public works director is eager to come forward to the commission. I know our fire chief, I know he's listening in, and I know he would probably love to present even right now if he could. He's got a lot of great work underway, so we can work with you, Chair Mizell, on developing a schedule for folks to come forward. And I can get some also direct input from our various directors about when they think they will specifically have good milestones to bring information forward for direction from this task force.
Okay, thank you. It's my general thought is, and similar to what Vice Chair Kima mentioned, is ultimately, hopefully our next meeting, the subcommittees will become really the working groups within this task force, and that the larger meeting time can be spent reviewing that work and hopefully on those presentations, so everyone on the task force has the benefit of that knowledge. Because I know I've been fortunate on the PRC where I've heard from Chief Brannigan, and I know a good amount of details about that project, but others have not had that opportunity. So definitely with focus, we'll talk about scheduling to get those presentations in and have the subcommittees do the bulk of the work. Commissioner Lindheim?
Yeah, I'm a little as to where we fit. It seems like the work gets done and then we hear about it, as opposed to us having some input into what the work ought to be. And I'm just not sure how that all plays out. So for example, the fire chief is going out for an RFP about what dispatch ought to look like or what some consultant should provide. And it seems that maybe this task force might have something to say about some of the elements of what that RFP ought to look like. So I'm just unclear on what role this task force plays, or do we just sit back and wait and hear what's already cooked, and then we, after the fact, we sort of say, well, maybe yes, maybe no. So I'm just unclear what our role is here.
Great question. And so yes and no. So where this task force will play a very strong leadership role is working with Mr. Mohammed and his team. You will hear about the work plan that he has and the various pieces of work that he will be bringing forward to this task force for specific review and input and discussion. You will hear about the community engagement and how that will be moving forward. And certainly we want to make sure there's space tonight for you to help provide input into that community engagement process. But as it pertains to the other elements, yes, they are moving in separate tracks. And certainly there will be opportunities for this task force to provide some thoughts and input on the various pieces of work that are moving forward. But you are correct, Commissioner Lindheim, that it is not necessarily the purview of this task force to provide direct input and feedback on those bodies of work as they are moving forward, separate and independent of this task force. Thank you for recognizing that.
Vice Chair Chima?
I have the same concern that Commissioner, or I just say Dan has, because too often in the city, things happen in silos and there is no coordination between those. So the SCU here, BERT here, looking at the police budget here. If all of that is being done somewhere else, then why are we here? And are we going to be a rubber stamp task force, or are we going to be a task force that's really engaged with the consultant, with the staff, with BPD, with Berkeley Mental Health? So I am really anxious to see what Mr. Muhammad has to say. I'm very anxious right now, actually, to hear what their plan is, because I've lived here too long and seen processes where work gets done somewhere else. Then it comes to the so-called task force, and I've also seen this on, other task forces, like on homelessness and a few other things. And then we're supposed to, at the last minute, sort of say, oh yeah, now all of this, so what do we like, what do we don't like? But I think this task force wants to be engaged in this process from the very beginning. And I at least would be very disappointed if the city plays the role of a buffer between us and the consultants and not allow us to be represented maybe in those stovepipes that are going on. Maybe one person from this task force needs to be in each one of those efforts. I don't know how we're going to work this out, but yeah, I'm feeling the same discomfort that Dan is. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And on my part, I agree. So on the PRC, I know about getting handed something and then being under the wire and then not having a large voice in it. And that happens too often in the city in general. But yeah, I'll be anxious to see the work plan as well. And I'm going to reserve my comment until we see the full plan from Mr. Muhammad. Commissioner Fine. You're muted, Commissioner.
Are we going to hear the plan tonight?
Yes, it's the next item after.
Okay, great.
Any other questions, commissioners? No, seeing none, we will move to the next item. Thank you, Mr. White and Ms. Cole. This is the National Institute of Criminal Justice Reform's work plan. Mr. Muhammad.
Thank you, Chair Mizell. Good evening, everyone. Appreciate the time and effort already put in by the task force and really look forward to working with you all. My name is David Muhammad. I'm the Executive Director of the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. We are an organization that have worked on criminal justice reform efforts and violence reduction efforts, and those criminal justice reform efforts have included police reform, police transformation efforts around the country. We are currently the co-chairs of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force in Oakland and involved in the task force as a technical assistance provider in Fresno and Seattle, and obviously here in Berkeley. The team is actually a large team of not only team members of NICJR, but several other organizations and leaders in Berkeley. So we'll talk about that. The work plan, I must say, was already presented by the city manager's office. So it'll be mostly a repeat of what you just saw. That was actually the work plan and the contract, but I'll just explain some of the details of it. And then we will have an additional presentation by our partners, Bright Research Group, who will detail the community engagement and community outreach process. So I will share my screen to share with folks a brief presentation around the work plan. Again, these are some of the points already made by the city manager's office. So this is our team. So there is, we're led by my organization, the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. We have several team members on with us this evening. We also have Bright Research Group. Bright Research Group is going to lead and run the community engagement process. They're going to do that in partnership with other local leaders, including Pastor Michael Smith, who's on the line with us tonight, Berkeley Youth Alternatives. Pastor Michael McBride is also a partner and is going to be involved. We have the Yale Law School Justice Collaborative, who are helping us, for instance, on the emerging new practices in public safety. The Rennie Public Law Group, who is helping us think through policies and the appropriateness of certain policies and how to implement them. So it is a large team of organizations and individuals who have a collection of expertise in this area. So our team has expertise in public safety initiatives and community outreach and engagement, police reform, legal analysis, government budgeting and relations, and various areas in this field. We, again, as I mentioned, co-facilitating the Oakland Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, which, for instance, last night approved a slate of 48 recommendations, and we'll take up more next week. We wrote the City of Fresno's Commission on Police Reforms report, which was significantly edited by the task force. Our version was a bit more progressive, and we are also involved in the City of Seattle's process. They don't have a task force per se, but we're conducting the calls for service analysis in Seattle, as well as recommending a number of alternative responses to certain calls for service. And we work with several cities around criminal justice reform and violence reduction. And that's just the NICJR team. The Bright Research Group that you're going to hear from, I'm going to skip this slide because you're going to hear from the Bright Research Group, the work that they do. They have extraordinary experience and expertise in not just community engagement, we're working with government agencies. They lead a very impressive process in the City of Oakland with the Department of Violence Prevention of building the capacity and knowledge and expertise of community-based organizations who are recipients of Department of Violence Prevention grants and numerous efforts to improve public safety and engage the community. Our work is here. This is what our work plan is. This is our deliverables for the City of Berkeley. We are going to work with the city auditor. We've begun that work already with the City of Auditors. So the city auditor is going to complete an analysis of calls for service. We have provided some input on the structure of that analysis so far. We are also going to conduct an analysis when they're done based upon their assessment of 911 calls, and we're going to add to it information or suggestions in terms of alternative responses. Obviously helping to facilitate and provide resources and support to this task force. We have a finished draft of a best practices and emerging models of community safety and policing report. And I'll talk about how we'll bring that forward to this task force when we get through this. We are going to develop a report on alternative responses and how we assess City of Berkeley, primarily police department duties and responsibilities, and recommend how those can be conducted by either other city departments or community-based organizations, or an alternative to law enforcement response to certain duties and calls for service. There's going to be a detailed community engagement process. And as David White mentioned, there's going to be a final report with an implementation plan, which won't just be, as he said, a list of recommendations, but how can we get from where we are now to implementing these recommendations? So each of these phases will come to the task force. And so for instance, we are currently drafting and have a final version of a first draft of a emerging models of community safety and policing report. We will provide that report to the task force and also prior to a task force meeting. And then we will also present that draft report to the task force to get feedback and input. And then we will make the edits to that report before submitting. Then we will do the same with all of these levels of all these deliverables, if you will. So we will develop this alternatives response report, of which we will have a draft that we will submit to the task force prior to a meeting, and then we will discuss it and we'll present it and discuss it in a task force meeting, and we will have various updates around community engagement that we present to the task force. And so that includes listening sessions and surveys and polls and community meetings that will be led by Bright Research Group, but will include Pastor Smith, it'll include Berkeley Youth Alternatives, it'll include Pastor Michael McBride in helping to engage as wide a part of the community as possible. Part of our charge was also to try to reach certain hard to reach populations that will put certain focus on, which will include incentivizing community members to engage in the process. But again, Bright Research Group will go into that in more depth. The timeline that I want to share with the group, and I believe all of these items were in the agenda package. This is all tentative. Or rather it's subject to change based upon the discussion we had earlier in this meeting in terms of special meetings, committee meetings. And so again, we entered an agreement with the city of Berkeley in late January and immediately began the process of conducting research into new and emerging models of community safety and policing. Work with the city auditor in terms of the calls for service contract. There is a website that we're working on that is live now, but it's still in, we're still making changes to it, but we'll make sure we share that with all of the task force members. And the website is meant to become a source for reports and information about the work that we're doing here. And so we certainly will ask all of the task force members for recommendations in terms of content to that website. Again, it is up and live now, that it has sparse content as a draft that we will continue to build on. And the April, one of the April meetings, assuming you have a special meeting in April, which is what David White kind of referenced, then it's likely the second meeting is when we will present the new and emerging models of community safety report, having provided to the task force much earlier. That might be when we can have the report or the presentation by the city auditor on the calls for service analysis. Then in the May meeting would be the report on alternative programs or services provided by the police department that can be provided by other city departments or community-based organizations. And that report again will be provided to the task force ahead of the meeting and then presented in the task force. And there will be various avenues for providing feedback, edits, suggestions. And then there is the final report. There is a discussion that we have been having with the city manager's office about the potential of stretching this a timeline out. I think you heard tonight this idea of, is there a first slate of recommendations that specifically address the budget, the fiscal year 21-22 budget. And then we also have additional recommendations for further phases to have more time, to work on them. And so this is the timeline and the work plan. Eventually, we will present all of this in a final report with an implementation plan to the city council and the mayor. Tentatively now, we have that slated all happening in the month of July. We might discuss postponing that until after the city council comes out of recess, which I believe is in August, and potentially present this package in September, with the exception of items that we want the council to consider for the coming fiscal year. So with that, I will stop and take questions. The only caveat, well, I'm actually going to suggest, Chair, because I think people have questions on the community outreach. I would suggest that I would move to my partner, the Bright Research Group to present the community engagement portion of this, and then we can discuss it all.
That's not
that'd
my
be
question.
Vice Chair.
Yes.
I just, Margaret, if you could turn off your sound, that'd be great.
Oh, yeah.
There's something that I really hope that we can avoid. While the Oakland task force has been working very, very hard, and those recommendations were, are now available, there's another document that is also available, which is the Oakland is Reimagining Public Safety version 2.0. And it's a thick document. It's put together by the Defund Police Coalition Response to Reimagining Public Safety Task Force for final recommendations. And it's done by some very fine people. And it's an excellent document. I want to know that how you are going to integrate what this document's recommendations are with the recommendations that the full body task force has made. Because I'm telling you, many of us sitting here, and I can see Paul nodding, have been very deeply engaged in the community around the issues of all the issues that came up so that this task force was created. And I hope that our community doesn't have to feel that they have to come up with a counter report and recommendations. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I understand your question correctly, you're asking about Oakland. And so the Oakland process was entirely different than this process, entirely. So in Oakland, our only role was to facilitate the meeting. So there was no chair of the task force, there was no co-chair. We run the meetings. On the other end, that's all we do. So we just run the meetings. We have no other role other than to provide support and to run the meeting. So we didn't come up with a single recommendation. I happen to think that was a poor design, but whatever. We didn't come up with a single recommendation, and we have specifically have zero responsibility of taking recommendations and merging them or any of that. So that's an entirely.
So is that Policy Links Road?
No. It was
So,
policy and ICJR.
City council people, or so whose role is it to take a community report and the report created by the consultants who wrote the Oakland report or are writing the Oakland report?
That's incorrect. The consultants had no role in in writing that report. So what Oakland did was create 4 advisory boards. Those advisory boards have 130 members of the community on them. That's who wrote the recommendations.
Yeah, I'm well aware of that. I'm just trying to avoid a difficult situation because, we're ready to go in Berkeley and get some stuff done and be fully engaged in the process. So I'll wait. Let's see how we.
Yeah, and so just as clarity, so it was community members who wrote the recommendations and another community group who largely their report supported those recommendations and just suggested some to not support and those to support. And so it was actually a wildly impressive piece of work by the advisory board members, 130 of whom, and then there were 17 task force members, and those 17, the advisory board presented the recommendations to the task force, and the task force are now voting on those recommendations. And the task force when it's done, will present that report to the city council. So our role will be to write that report, but it will be to present the task force recommendations.
So I'm going to take the liberty of having been elected the vice chair to take a little more time. When I look at the list of your team, I can't tell how many women are on that team. If LGBTQ folks are included on your team, I do see some excellent people, but I don't know who the person is from BYA. I can't tell. I do know both the pastors and admire their work. I think it would be it would create more clarity if we're going to talk about inclusiveness to see how diverse your team looks like and who's included. Are Indigenous people included in the team? Who are your advisors? So if you could put gender, names on some of those things and give us a little more information, that would be really appreciated. Thank you.
And that might be why it may be good to have the next presentation. So you have the full presentation and then we can have the discussion.
Yeah, so let's have the presentation, Mr. Muhammad.
Great. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Bright Star, who is the president of Bright Research Group, who, as I mentioned before, has deep experience and knowledge and expertise, not only in community engagement, but research and best practices. So turn it over to Bright Star.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bright Star Olson, and I am the CEO and principal of Bright Research Group. If I could kindly get screen sharing privileges, then I will share my presentation.
Shamika, you got that? You need me to do something?
Oh, it looks like I got it.
You got it.
Cool. Thanks, Shamika.
Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. So again, my name is Bright Star Olson, and I'm going to be facilitating the community engagement process. And I'm going to speak with you this evening about our team, give you a little bit more background, some of the values that we bring to this process, which I think will be aligned with some of the priorities that I've been hearing expressed this evening around sort of an authentic community engagement process. And then I'll talk with you about our planned activities, but you know, as I'm hearing you all speak, I imagine that you all may want to also facilitate your own engagement activities as well, which we're happy to align with and support with as well. So Bright Research Group is a community research evaluation and capacity building firm. We're based in Oakland, and we use the tools of research and evaluation to advance social and racial equity. We partnered with a broad range of public agencies and foundations throughout the Bay Area. We've worked with the city of Berkeley before. We conducted a community engagement process around their health equities priorities and engaged diverse groups within the city of Berkeley. Our model of community engagement really relies on deep partnerships with community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and community leaders. And so we will be wanting to hear from you all which organizations we should plan to connect with to reach priority populations. We also bring deep expertise in working on community-based approaches to public safety and violence prevention. Since our founding 10 years ago, we've partnered with the City of Oakland, with Oakland Unite, which is now the Department of Violence Prevention, on helping them to build out their approach to capacity building with their portfolio grantees. We've also conducted evaluation of that initiative. We, for 8 years, conducted evaluation of the Oakland Police Department's community policing program. So we offer a wide range of experience to you all and a culturally diverse team. So here is the team from the Bright Research Group side that will be involved in facilitating community engagement activities. I am the CEO and principal. Holly Joshi will be co-leading this process. She's a senior consultant at Bright Research Group. She brings over 2 decades of experience in government leadership, including leadership roles at both the Oakland Police Department and community-based organizations in Oakland. Allie Hugh is a senior consultant at Bright Research Group, and Jesus Verduzco is a senior consultant as well. Esteem Brumfield is a Paris Research Fellow, as is Rod Dominguez. And we will be the folks that you will see on the ground facilitating community engagement activities. In addition, Pastor Michael Smith and Pastor Michael McBride will be facilitating additional input with the Black community, and Berkeley Youth Alternatives will be facilitating youth input.
I'm sorry, what was Vanetta Thomas's role?
Oh, sorry, I'm covering up Vanetta. Vanetta Thomas is also a senior consultant at Bright Research Group, and she will be facilitating community input as well. So I want to tell you a little bit about our approach to community engagement. So we partner with a wide range of public agencies that come to us asking for community input. We want to host a town hall, or we want to hear from different groups. And the first question that we always ask our clients or the agencies that we partner with is, what are the decisions that you're going to make based on what you learn from residents? And so we're going to ask you all to think about that as you partner with us on community engagement, to think about what are the decisions that you plan to make that you learn from Berkeley residents. And so we don't believe in sort of tokenized forums for input. And so we're going to try to be disciplined around the kinds of questions we ask. We always say, don't ask about things that you've already decided on. And also, community input is an opportunity to communicate in the most transparent way possible about the decisions that have already been made, the constraints of your process, your role in the process, and who the key decision makers are. So we try to create forums that evoke empathy and more understanding of the lived experience of diverse groups of residents and communities among systems, funders, task force members, and other decision makers. We try to create forums for residents to influence government decisions. And a key part of our approach is always to leverage the community-based organizations that have those ties and to get that representation. We also seek to gain a more fact-based understanding. Many times people talk about different communities without actually going onto the ground to learn about what are their lived experiences, what are their preferences, what are their priorities for community safety. And then we'll also do that sort of community education piece where those participants in different community engagement activities can learn about the City of Berkeley's priorities, mandates, and decision-making. So the goals for this process are really to generate community and resident insights with respect to their priorities for public safety. We want to learn about their perceptions of law enforcement and the Berkeley Police. We want to hear about their own goals for reimagining public safety and their feedback on identified priorities and mandates from City Council. We'll also want to hear feedback on alternative responses that are being considered. In terms of information sharing from the City of Berkeley, residents will have the chance to learn about current mandates, the role and composition of the task force. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Key issues that the task force will be deciding or providing input, and what decisions the task force will be making based on what they learn. Here are some of the planned activities that are in our scope of work. So the first, and we're going to start on this pretty quickly, is a citywide survey. And we're looking to survey Berkeley residents in all districts, and we're going to need your assistance in reaching residents in all districts and make sure that different populations of interest are represented in those survey responses. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about that in a moment. And then we will also be hosting some population-specific workshops. And we're planning, because of shelter in place, in the past we have done actually pretty extensive outreach with homeless residents in both Berkeley and Oakland. But given shelter in place in COVID, I don't believe that we're going to be able to do direct outreach for this process. But we're hoping to connect with homeless service providers or providers that serve the homeless, Black residents, Latino residents, crime survivors. Those are some of the priority population workshops. And then we will be hosting 2 community town halls, and those will be open to residents from all districts. BYA will be conducting a couple input sessions with young people in Berkeley, and then we'll be engaging the Black residents. In addition to having a specific workshop for them, Pastors Smith and McBride will also be hosting additional workshops there as well. And then we will be preparing a summary of findings from the community engagement process that we facilitate. So some of the ways that we're hoping that we can partner with you all on this, in addition to hearing your input and feedback this evening on this plan, is to make sure that your districts and your priority populations, the communities that you have connections with, are represented in the citywide survey, and complete the survey and attend the town halls. We also hope that you will attend the town hall meetings, and that you will provide feedback on findings from the community engagement process. We also hope that you will make decisions based on what you learn from residents, which I've heard that you have that. Sounds like you have that commitment. I've been hearing that expressed this evening. So I'll talk quickly about the resident survey. So that's going to be the first community engagement activity that we facilitate. The purpose will be to gather resident opinions or support for alternative responses and adopted city mandates. It will also be an opportunity to gather resident feedback on priorities for reimagining. And we'll ask a few questions about resident satisfaction with and perception of the Berkeley Police Department. And our goal is really to hear from residents across Berkeley. I see a couple of hands being raised, but I think I'll just finish. I think this is my last slide. So if you just, I'll take questions at the end, if that's okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. I just want to make you all aware that with this survey, sometimes communities do, their whole community engagement process is just a very comprehensive, randomized representative sample that yields generalizable results. And this is not that kind of survey. We simply did not have the budget for that. And so the success of this survey in terms of representing the voices and perspectives of Berkeley residents will really depend on how well City Council, task force members, and community-based partners help get the word out about this survey. You can see that the timeline is pretty tight here. We're working on survey development right now. We will be submitting it to the city manager for review the week of March 22nd to 26th. And then once we have a finalized version, we will translate to Spanish, and then we will disseminate over the month of April, and then be analyzing results in May. So I saw several hands go up, and just put.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Arger.
Thank you. Something that immediately jumps out to me that I find very concerning is that there is no planned targeting of LGBTQ people. There's no outreach there that we're seeing at all. LGBTQ people and trans people, people of color specifically, are incredibly over-policed. The over-policing, particularly of Black trans women, is incredibly harsh. So it really concerns me that we're addressing policing without addressing that. Additionally, there's no targeting of Indigenous communities. Indigenous people are also extremely hyper-vulnerable when it comes to policing. So I'm very, very concerned that even in the survey portion, we are leaving out critical and important populations who are very vulnerable and deserve representation. Additionally, I'm hoping that this body can see the survey that you're sending out, because as a member of this body, I'm concerned that a lot of this process appears to be pre-prescribed for us, and that we are kind of along for the ride on this one. But it seems like the intentionality of gathering all of these community voices is that we should have input on this process. So particularly given, I'm sorry, I think it's really egregious to not include LGBTQ people or Indigenous people. Like with that kind of a mission, I think it's important for us to be able to see the survey before it's sent out.
I think that those groups are incredibly important to be represented. And, you know, we believe in the concept of intersectionality where, you know, Black folks, are, as you mentioned, are also trans, Latino folks are also LGBTQ. And so we have limited resources, and our hope is that these groups that are most impacted by over-policing will be represented at the town halls, at the workshops, and through the survey as well. And our other, I mean, I know that there are many groups that should be represented on this list, but we had a limited budget, and we did have our original budget cut. And so, you know, that's something that we can discuss in terms of, you know, is there a group that we should remove to replace, but from this list?
Commissioner Fine.
I think we need to take a step back here because Alicia really did make a brilliant remark. And if you look at your contract on Section 4 dealing with community engagement, I think it's the approach and framework that you brought to the contract that has structured your way of doing this engagement process. You did a citywide survey you're planning. Then you had Black residents as your specific community, and you also had formerly incarcerated and youth, homeless, and employees of the Berkeley Police Department. And those are the only groups that are contained in that section of community engagement. And from there, you've structured this presentation tonight around that. For Black residents on the Section 4B, they have surveys being administered, and they're also included in the input sessions. Hopefully, it said it might be in person. There are going to be stipends for hard to reach populations, but those are characterized in terms of formerly incarcerated, homeless, and youth. The thing that's the problem is that if you look at civil rights law, we go by equal opportunities for groups in order to be able to remedy situations. And that's the purpose of the community engagement. It is true, the 2018 Equity and Policing survey that was done showed that the traffic stops are 6.5 times higher for Black residents than white. And they were like 3 point something for Latino. But the fact of the matter is there are other groups that are also impacted. One is LGBT. Part of the problem in the contract is it doesn't reach to isolated groups who are rejected by families, potentially faith-based groups, and their communities. And so it's not expensive to do that outreach. I've talked to a number of LGBT people this week. It's just that they're isolated and we have to make the extra efforts in order to be able to pull them in. Another group who should definitely be there are people with disabilities, particularly people with severe mental illness and substance use who are capable of contributing. In fact, under the ADA and the technical guidance, they have a right to meaningfully participate. So I think when we take a few steps back and we looked at the protected groups who deserve equal opportunities to participate in community engagement, we need to go out there and make those efforts to bring everybody in, because I can tell you, Alicia's totally correct. At the high level of over-policing in the LGBT community, 32% of the people at Covenant House in Berkeley, the youth shelter, are LGBT. So I can understand everything you're saying, but I'm just really hoping that people can come together and we can have an approach that is very, very inclusive of everyone.
I think that's the goal, is to create an inclusive process in all of our methodologies.
Yes, if I can jump in briefly. Yeah, I mean, I think those populations, disabled folks, LGBTQ folks would be critical. And I know you don't control the budget and you don't control the whole timeline either. I fully understand that. But, you know, with the conversations already going on in terms of extending the timeline past this fiscal year, I would at least be curious to whether ultimately the city council would entertain more funding so we can get those critical groups. And that may be something either certainly we will discuss, and I hope on your end that becomes part of the discussion, because those are very critical groups when we talk about this work that really should be included in the survey of the city's population.
If I can say one thing before, and Bright Star might have additional comments. One, thank you, Chair Mizell. So a couple of pieces. One, as Bright Star just said, we certainly, even with whatever the current limitations we have, we're certainly willing to, one, work with folks. And I think as Margaret said, there's people who are currently willing to help and engage, who are part of other parts of the community. We'd love to work with them and to make that happen. Just as an FYI, I think we can overcome this, but just as FYI, our budget was cut in nearly in half, right, from what we proposed. So we propose a much larger effort. That being said, again, we can work with existing folks. For instance, as you heard from the city manager's office, there's other community engagement processes and these other initiatives. And so we want to make sure we're not being duplicative, but making sure we're leveraging each other, right? And so as these other initiatives are involved in community engagement, let's work with each other to make sure we're having as broad as possible outreach.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think we will rely on each of you in this that are members of this task force to advise us as to which are the best organizations or community leaders to partner with for each of these engagement opportunities, whether it's this survey or the town halls or the population specific conversations.
Thank you. And yeah, that would definitely be a topic of conversation going forward. Commissioner Malvito.
Hey, thank you so much. I have great conversation. I loved hearing it, and I completely agree with Alicia and Commissioner Alicia and Margaret. Some things that I'm really interested and curious about, particularly around I guess everything about the community engagement piece, is the one. We'll start with one. The survey. I heard that it's going to be done in English and in Spanish, which is great. I hope it's also in whatever other language is needed in Berkeley. I know that we have more than just English and Spanish speakers. But maybe this is a quick back and forth, might be a little fast, but how will the survey be disseminated is my first question. And then I can wait for the answer.
The survey will be via a link. It'll be online.
Okay.
If folks want to do, if folks are interested in doing like in-person outreach, say at homeless encampments or in their own neighborhoods and communities, we can also create some kind of format for a paper-based survey or some paper-based version of it as well, if that's of interest to folks want to do sort of population-specific in-person outreach.
That's great. Thank you so much for answering that. I agree. I think there is, as we've all seen, even just as with COVID and the distribution of vaccines and testing, technology has been a huge barrier for access. So I can imagine technology can be also a barrier for this as well, especially for our elders and folks who are not computer savvy. The other question was, I guess, I can't remember correctly if this was a part of the survey, but the assessing the resident satisfaction with the police department. I think this is a great question, but it's going to be really important that that the survey is distributed widely, and it's not just the people who traditionally have access, because it's going to skew the response. And maybe you folks have anticipated this already. This is already a part of sort of like the answers and the analysis of what comes in, but I think it would be really important. But I think even more importantly, just kind of stepping backwards, and this is going to be kind of a small plug for an event that's happening on Saturday, is that, you know, people get a survey that asks them what their relationship with the police department is, or if they know about this or that. Folks might not know what any of this is, who the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force is whatsoever. Like, my fiance, who's in the next room, doesn't know what we do. And I mean, that's fair. Like, I understand. And I guess a small plug for the event that's happening on Saturday is an example of something we could be doing and thinking creatively, which is what I'm all about, is we're having, in partnership with this Mayor Arreguin and Councilmember Kate Harrison, and also Chair Mizell, a sort of a community oversight and policing event where we kind of explain what is the Police Accountability Board and why it's not the PRC or the Police Review Commission anymore, and what's the difference and why it matters. And it's going to be available with Spanish interpretation after a little nudging, but it's important that we have these kinds of steps beforehand so that folks feel confident in their responses. So it's not just, you know, filling out a survey and that is put in front of me, but we actually get really good responses. And we might even have buy-in from people to want to participate and say, like, hey, like, I read or heard about this before, and I really have an idea about how this could be better. Maybe this is already something that, again, has already been considered, and I'm really curious to hear if it was. But on my last point, I do think that the on-the-ground outreach is key. I think that is going to be really important. I think, you know, again, just kind of going back to how we've seen vaccine distribution all across the country, particularly with the Latino population, you know, we have not received the vaccine in an equitable manner. And that's not because there isn't like an attempt to, but it's because we are behind. There's a lot of barriers in front of us to access language, technology, et cetera. And as a lot of people on this call know, with communities like of color, we like face-to-face. We like to build community in person. And so if I send a random link to someone, even if it's people within the Latinos Unidos network, they might be less likely to answer it if instead I were to say, like, hey, like, let's just talk through this. Let's have a conversation. I know it's a monumental effort, and I'm not in any way saying we should do it for free either. I think there should be some kind of compensation for volunteers in some way, shape, or form, and also an orientation for volunteers so they also feel confident in distributing the survey or any sort of questions around that. But it's you know, a big piece of this is the community engagement, and I hope we're, you know, taking all these things into consideration so we can do it effectively, and it's not just, again, like a rubber stamp or a box that we're checking. Sorry for the rant.
Thank you for that. And those are all really excellent points. And, you know, if under normal circumstances, we would definitely be doing that in-person outreach. And we at Bright Research Group do train a lot of community-based organizations and community leaders in participatory action research and, you know, sort of outreach methods and survey administration and gathering, help organizations figure out how to gather their own input. In terms of one of the points you were making around folks not knowing what this task force is or not knowing that this whole process is happening, any community engagement event, whether it's a survey, a town hall, a focus group, or other community meeting, is always an opportunity to also educate residents about what is happening and what this process is and what this task force is and what their role is. And so we try to integrate that into every community-based outreach or community engagement event that we organize. Another value that we bring to this work is called plain language. We work with a literacy specialist who specializes in plain language, and she helps to translate any kind of bureaucratic speak into plain language so the average person with an 8th grade education can access it and understand and then give their authentic opinion. We did do a similar survey in Oakland, partnering with schools, community-based organizations, different community leaders, and we got an amazing response actually, and it was on the Oakland Police Department and assessing resident satisfaction. And using those sort of community-based ties in schools and other venues, we got an incredible response and a lot of feedback from people. So people are eager to give input on this topic. And I think in partnership with you all, I think we'll be able to get good representation.
Thank you. Commissioner Harker.
Thank you. I have a two-part question similar to Hector. My first question, and apologies if you did address this, but I asked if we as a body can see the survey before it's sent out, and I don't recall getting an answer.
I think that if I would need to confer with the city manager and NICJR around, I'm happy to share it with you all. It just will mean that our timeline for getting it out will be pushed back because we are not coming to you again, I think, until April. So I think that would be the only issue that I would see with that.
Yeah, so I'd just jump in and say we'd be happy to have that with the understanding push back the timeline, and so, or we could potentially have an out of meeting type of feedback process where individually task force members are being able to give us feedback. So we can do that. It'll be drafted pretty soon. I'm speaking on behalf of Star, so we can share the draft as soon as it's done and we can receive feedback. I see nods heading, some that sounds like a good plan. Okay.
Thank you, David. My secondary question is that, from my understanding, we're not going, or this group is in no official capacity doing on the ground outreach. No, there is on the ground outreach.
We're not doing any on the ground outreach.
I thought. So that's.
There's one exception is we are providing stipends through community-based organizations. And so we're going to be able to provide stipends to, for instance, homeless services organizations, and they can pass through those stipends to like clients they work with or somebody they work in order to, for instance, like fill out surveys, participate in feedback. So in that way, they'll be direct on the ground.
Okay. Yeah, because that is a major concern for me, because unhoused people obviously are really heavily policed, particularly by UC Berkeley, where there's double jurisdiction of UCPD and BPD at the same time. They get double policed. And also the unhoused population is over 50% Black. So if we're not reaching out to the unhoused population, we're missing a large swath of incredibly important community members. But I think it would be important to concretize that in some way. I don't, like, it just seems leaving outreach to unhoused people up in the air feels a little uncomfortable to me, because that's a really crucial group, and like already crucial groups have been omitted. So given these omissions, I feel like concretizing outreach to at least unhoused people, if not Indigenous and LGBTQ people, is crucial.
And so I'll start in Brett. So unhoused communities is specifically spelled out. So there is going to be.
Yes, I just meant concretizing the actual outreach.
What the work will be. Yeah, so the part that is concretized, but we can put more flesh on those bones and share these with you is partnering with, and we appreciate actually Commissioner Chima for suggesting a number of organizations of who to, or particularly around the unhoused population to partner with. We've already been engaged with some, but through, again, like I said, through those organizations that are currently engaging the unhoused population, also providing financial stipends to participate is that's what the plan so far, but having more details on that, certainly we can make that happen.
Yeah, and we will be doing that for each of those priority populations that was specified, and our approach is to partner with community-based providers that have that direct access.
And how can we recommend groups to you guys?
So it's a little funny story, but the short version is to send emails to, Commissioner Chima knows why I'm laughing, to send emails to David White or Shamika, and they will filter that to us.
Thank you. Commissioner Ho.
Yeah, I feel like
others have echoed the concerns that I've had. One being what I heard in the beginning, and it sounds like maybe I misheard, was that service providers were going to be used as proxies for populations. And so for people that are homeless or have housing insecurity, I think it is particularly important that we are able to reach those people directly. Also that this piece seems so crucial, and to the extent that there is flexibility in timelines, that this piece not be rushed, because it seems like we have a lot of leaders in this space with a lot of expertise, but we also have to be respectful of community organizations and their ability to, to quickly partner with us.
Yeah, and I could just say one thing on that. One is, for instance, talk about the Oakland example. There was this tension, this very intriguing, nuanced tension about people wanting to move immediately on making changes, right? That folks feeling like we don't need to wait, we need to make changes now, balancing that with wanting to do it right, right? Not wanting to rush things and wanting to make sure we take the appropriate time. And there is some tension about trying to figure out what is the balance in wanting to move quickly to make reforms, but also understanding wanting to do it right. And one other thing, I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask, and I failed to do this earlier, ask Pastor Michael Smith to jump in on this in general, but also specifically in terms of the unhoused population.
Sure. And I think these questions are right on, and we need to be making sure that we're embraced and engaging in this dialogue in this way, and not just engaging in the dialogue, but making sure that we're bringing folks in. I will say that from our standpoint, we have a hot meals program that provides both meals and some clothing, as well as food pantry items. 75 to 80% of the population that we deal with is the unhoused community. And even though in COVID, we haven't been able to have them in a dining hall area, we do to-go meals. And I think that we will stay and continue to stay engaged in that community, not just in terms of surveying, but making sure that folks, their voices are really heard. And that's an inclusive community. The folks that are unhoused, as well as the small segment that may not be, they may be housed, but still living below the poverty line. They are an inclusive community. They're not just Black and brown. They're LGBTQ, they are women. There's some indigenous folks, there's Asian folks as well. And I think it's important to know that some of the outreach, some of the organizations that are partnering with, that we're partnering with are doing, we are not exhaustive, and I don't think anyone is, but I definitely think that we're very sensitive to making sure that we get the voices and the engagements of folks that are most impacted. Because one group that I will tell you, as much as we're talking about over-policing, we talk about the over-policing of different groups, and that's true. One of the groups that we don't specifically call out, but we've done it generally, but we don't really talk about the over-policing of young Black males, quite frankly, across life orientation lines, across poverty lines, and they tend to be probably the most unpoliced group. But we're not lumping folks together, and surely the indigenous community, the LGBTQ community, we need to be standing in solidarity with everyone, but know that we're going to do our best efforts and work with, within the team, and also get the input from you all and others to make sure that we're representative of everyone.
Thank you, Pastor Smith.
Thank you, Pastor. And one thing I would ask, as we go through this process, again, I'm sure you're already planning to brief us as things happen. But if we can just get some sort of email, preferably before things happen, about what is the process going on your end, so folks will have a chance to weigh in before things start happening. And obviously, if there's a significant issue, then we can consider a special meeting. But I just want to make sure that we are aware of what's going on throughout this process. And it's really critical. We have a very impressive group of folks here who, frankly, could probably make all this happen, but we'll need to know what's happening. We're going to need time, and we're going to need really full support and honesty as we go through this process. So I hope that's something we can have done consistently.
And if I could, absolutely, I think that the one thing I want to show, we don't have we can't put this in the chat because it's a public meeting. So, but we'll send this. This is the current website. I think you can get to it with just www. Make it easier to remember. And so it's up right now, though I must say it is very draft. It's very bare bones. So I'm only showing this to you as an example, even though it is live, because we wanted to give you an example. But we would love for two things. One, for instance, my team member Cheryl, who's on with us, just texted me and said, "Hey, that event on Saturday, we can post that if we get the information." So not only can we provide information, but if you all have information for us to share, we would love to include that.
Thank you. Commissioner Blake.
Thank you so much. I wanted to assure this body that Consider the Homeless is out within the community. Even today, I'm taking in messages. We are delivering soup. We deliver food directly into the community twice a week, over 150, sometimes 200 individuals. We've been doing this for close to a year now. So my assurance to you is that we do have connections out there, and we are making those connections, and those connections are built on trust, which you're going to need with this community, with any of the communities that you deal with, in order to run surveys and to get them to freely give you information that would be very valuable. But again, I want to assure people that the thought that that isn't happening is erroneous. It is happening. We don't promote it as such because we're trying to protect the unhoused and the unsheltered that we're dealing with constantly. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. My apologies. I forget if Commissioner Malvito or Commissioner Fine, which one of you raised your hand first?
No, I can wait till a few people finish because I've gotten to talk.
Okay, Commissioner Malvito.
Thank you, Commissioner Fine. Just right off the bat, I'll definitely send that information for Saturday's event over to you folks. That would be great. Even as we're having this discussion about inclusion and all this work, I guess something maybe that could be answered over an email is, can we have a Spanish interpreter be here for these meetings? Maybe as a good model for something that could be adopted for the wider city council and other city commissions, as I know that's not currently happening. I hope that maybe that's something we can definitely establish. I guess the question that is in my head is, Ms. Olson, I think you mentioned that there was training that you have done before for folks who do outreach and, sort of capacitate them with the content, which is wonderful. And to me, that kind of sounds like it's something we can maybe start organizing now. If we maybe begin doing, even within our own networks, just as in anticipation to when the survey is released or whatever, this could be a good opportunity for CBOs to start engaging with their folks saying that something is coming, and maybe start scheduling trainings if we are going to be doing some kind of outreach or survey, in-person survey or what have you, and maybe start scheduling those things out so we can, get the word out as soon as possible. I know that we're on a tight timeline, which is why I guess, time is of the essence. So I'm just, ready to engage this process in terms of the outreach efforts and getting the word out as fast as possible. So I guess my question is, what are we waiting for this particular piece?
In terms of, well, this is our first meeting. So our first meeting was sharing the plan with you all and getting some input and feedback. And we appreciate all that's been provided. And I think we'll go back and look at our scope and look at, what do we shift to accommodate the interest in getting that training. And we certainly, while we don't intend to go out and be on the ground collecting data, we did intend to partner with community-based organizations that have those deep ties and those trusting relationships, and to stipend them to do some of that direct outreach, whether it's virtual outreach or in person. That would be up to the organization. So we can go back and figure out what that timeline is. But we were working, our first order of business was to try to get the survey out because that is our mechanism for getting that community-wide input. So we can go back and look at where we could integrate that training and capacity building as well.
And then just so you know, Commissioner Malvito, Secretary Cole did send out the flyer that Mr. Norris prepared for the Saturday event to this task force. Previously, we've been working directly with him as I'm overseeing on the city side the implementation of the accountability board. So thank you for letting the task force know about the email that went out.
Commissioner Fine.
Right now we're going through two community engagement process, the ACU and the one for reimagining public safety. The SCU process is almost ready to, after 2 weeks, to start to implement a plan. It started out by a few of us putting together a list of almost 100 organizations, putting it into Google Docs, contacting with the people, many of them who are on this call and have direct links into the homeless community, but really looking at it from an on-the-ground perspective at how we can get the best information to inform the SCU program design for non-police emergency response. And I feel like I'm hoping that we can have another meeting, a special meeting with this group, where some of that input can also be integrated into what I see as a approach and framework that was brought to us tonight. And I'm hoping that I know that the leaders from our faith-based communities serve diverse groups out in the communities. And I also feel from that we have more people that are on this call as part of the task force who can further contribute to expanding this community engagement for reimagining policing. I think it would be well worth our time. There's a lot of folks who have rapport and trust in the homeless community and with many other communities. And I think overall it would get us much more robust, inclusive data to inform the policing reforms.
Commissioner Harger.
Thank you. It seems like a lot of the problems or the holdups here in terms of reaching all populations that should be reached, because I assume we can all agree that we should be reaching out to LGBTQ people and we should be reaching out to Indigenous people if at all possible. And it seems like the holdup is the budget. And I was hoping that you could explicate, like, how is it that the budget was cut so drastically, and is there any remedy for that? Like, are we stuck with this budget that is unsatisfactory and limiting the functionality of this process?
Yeah,
I'll jump. So I'll just explain for the benefit of this task force. Our council allocated about $200,000 to this assignment, and we advocated, and our council was very supportive of increasing the budget for this work to $270,000. So we were able to increase the budget that was allocated, but I just want to make sure that this group understands sort of the fiscal realities that our city is operating within. The past fiscal year, we just had a very substantial deficit, and we'll be digesting another very significant deficit. So far, we're at about $35 million deficit for this upcoming fiscal year. So we're operating in a very constrained environment fiscally. So that's kind of where we sit at the moment.
And so the original RFP didn't identify an amount in it, and so our budget was submitted for 450,000. I think it was maybe a little bit more than that, which included a bit more robust, a lot more robust community engagement process. But as you see, there's several other components, obviously, of the work plan, and so that's how this came about. You know, to be very honest, Bright Research Group was very concerned about the limited budget for this very reason that we're talking about, right? That to do a deeper dive on the community engagement. But I think the opportunity we have is that there's other community engagement processes connected to public safety and police reform efforts. Second, there is, as I think several of you all have said, the expertise and connections of the folks on this, not only on this, well, on this call, including people who are on our team and certainly the task force members. And so I think we can leverage both the other processes as well as the expertise and range of this task force to I think, as was said, to do what we need. What we want to do is reach all of the population, especially those populations that we need to hear from in particular.
Vice Chair Chima. Buna, do you have anything? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm a little slow, a little older, so a little slow. I want to wait until everyone has spoken and then kind of try to round this off a little bit, because community-based organizations keep coming up, and also this lack of funding for our consultants keeps coming up. So I want to just have that at the end. I want to hear what everyone else has to say.
Commissioner Diaz.
Yeah, I just had a quick, maybe just a thought. So I was thinking in terms of like trying to reach populations. I know Mr. Smith brought up the whole thing of trying to reach out to like young African Americans and other people who are like most marginalized and underrepresented and over-policed. And I kind of had a thought, maybe one of the strategies would be reaching out to like BTEC, which has those which is like a continuation school, which works with the youth that are like kind of failing in the educational system. And I feel like that would be a good way to kind of bring people in that represent that demographic in that population. So that was just a thought I had of trying to reach out through that like educational component of it.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I think it's very clear we will have to compile a list of all of our aggregate knowledge of community groups that can best really help us positively facilitate this process with those relationships of trust and relationships that this is really a way to have your voice heard in the way this city has never done before. Commissioner Lutzker.
Thanks so much for that presentation. I guess I have a question for Mr. White, which is, so the first question is, you said that there's a $35 million deficit in the city, but we also just found out that there's going to be $68 million that Berkeley is going to be receiving from the federal relief bill that just got signed. So I guess I'm wondering how that money can be used to both fill the deficit and also perhaps fund some of this. And then I'll just make my second point or question, which is kind of a procedural one. I know, Chair Mizell, that you were talking about maybe forming subcommittees next time we meet, but it sounds like there's two really big groups of interests here that might warrant forming subcommittees now. One is perhaps a subcommittee focused on community outreach, and there can be some mechanisms by which people put input about specific organizations, but maybe a subcommittee could handle that. And then the other subcommittee would be focused on trying to review the survey, which thank you, Commissioner Harger, for bringing that up. I think, there are folks who have expertise here in, working with specific populations. I come here with expertise on survey design and data analysis. And so it would be great to have those two subcommittees. So I guess one is kind of a procedural question, and then a question for Mr. White around the budget. Thanks.
On the procedural question, to my understanding, since we have not agendized any discussion of setting up subcommittees, unfortunately, I don't think we can consider it at this meeting. But certainly next one, and if we have that special meeting sooner, I think that's something we should fit in as well.
If I could weigh in, there's a portion on the agenda towards the end that gives you an option to discuss future agenda items, so you can add it there.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, Mr. White, could you answer the question about the budget issue and the $35 million shortfall versus the $68 million that we're expecting to get? I mean, I assume, I'm not a budget person, but I assume they're in different fiscal years. But if there's a way to, move things around to provide the support that's necessary for the kind of outreach that this process really deserves.
So yeah, sorry, I got kicked in, kicked out, and then the computer was on mute. So we just, the American Rescue Plan was just adopted. And within that, there are resources for the city of Berkeley. We are, the only guidance around those are in the legislation itself, and it is incredibly vague. What we understand about the legislation is that the city will be able to receive $68 million. It will come to us in two payments separated by 12 months. And we are allowed to use those that source of revenue for expenses incurred through December of 2024. What we understand about the use of that money is that it can be used to address our COVID-19 response, that it can be used to address revenue loss and economic impacts of COVID-19, and that it can be used for water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. We know that it cannot be used to support any use or any revenue loss due to a tax reduction, and it cannot be used to be directly deposited into our pension fund. So what we are trying to get our arms around right now is obviously, number one, we're waiting for regulations to actually come from the federal government to define for us how the money can be used. So I cannot directly answer your question because we don't have a lot of details. I also want to be very clear about the source of our fiscal stress that I outlined. That's just our general fund. We've incurred massive deficits in our parking funds due to the lack of parking both on street and off street, as well as our marina. So it is way too premature for us at this moment in time to determine how long those resources we will be able to stretch them for, and where we will be actually able to deploy them. So we are just trying to figure all that out. And so that's about as far as I can go because we're just in the beginning stages of understanding this.
Thank you, Mr. White. And yeah, I was very curious. I'm sure the whole task force will be curious as to how those funds could be assessed or excuse me accessed. We are sitting at this interesting time point where we're probably 3 months away from being able to mostly freely do community on the ground outreach. Probably 3 or 4 months away before we can have any access to those funds. But I think it is critical that we do. And, I will certainly stress that to my council member and others that, this process, I know they take very seriously and they want to see this come to a positive fruition, and that's going to involve having to spend a little more money. And I know cities in real fiscal issues. I don't want to say those aren't real. I know they are real. But we do spend millions and other things. I'm sure we could come up with another $250,000 to fund this process. Vice Chair Kima.
couple of things. One, the list that we put together of all the places that could be included in terms of doing the outreach and also the engagement process. We sent it to David White and the staff, and hopefully it can be passed on to our consultants. One of the pieces that's missing there is that I don't believe that anybody except maybe City Hall knows which CBOs are open, how they're providing services. Like Berkeley Mental Health is almost entirely, Zooming with their clients. And we don't know if people are coming into any of the CBOs. I know the shelters are available and there are people there we can go. And many of us really have ever since COVID started, especially Paul Blake and his team and other people have been going into those spaces and social distancing and talking with people. The entire Berkeley Outreach Coalition is out there in the field engaging with people. The clinic folks at Lifelong are seeing people. So it's not that, we won't have access to folks if we have the courage to get out there in the field and actually engage with them. And I believe many in our community would be willing to be trained to be able to actually be those foot soldiers that go out and do the work that is not being paid for. In terms of, so someone needs to do that very quickly. So what is the capacity of the community-based organizations and the faith-based organizations? First, look at the list. It's like 120 organizations and associations, including DBA and other folks. On the money issue is there's no reason not to start going deep, working fast, and coming to the city before the April. There's going to be a lot on the city when they look at the budget in April to see if there's any savings or if there's more money to allocate, that we get in that line. So that's one. Two, I really don't believe that we would need another $250,000 to do the engagement process. And also this task force, I'm really having trouble understanding still what our role is. Maybe I'll understand it better as a few more meetings happen. But I've worked with now, I don't know, 8 or 9 mayors in the city of Berkeley, about 7 or 8 city managers, so that's 5 or 6 police chiefs. And this city can always find money. We find money to pay our fine BPD, whatever they ask for overtime. So I don't want to hear that there's not money in the city. It's where the money is. And we need to figure out why it's being spent, whether it's they're, answering mental health calls or responding to them, all of that we'll see. But I heard the council person who appointed me, Ben, very clear when we were putting that legislation together with all of us were engaged, very committed. And I think all of us should go back and read the July 16th document, I think it was, and look at the commitment that the mayor and the council are making to this process. So if we don't do it well, and we don't produce the data that will actually inform what the future of the city is going to look like, we are the Reimagining Task Force. We're supposed to be here reimagining for the people who live here, not just the consultants, but we also, I think, need to take charge of this a little bit more and say, hey, we're powerful people, we're connected in our communities, we're willing to step up. But not if we step up for free and then our consultants come in and say, for us to be able to step up, we're going to have, equity. I don't know how I'm going to figure this out, but I will figure it out. But if we really need money to go deeper, I think we need to get real clear on what, how deep we're going to go, because we're talking about community-based organizations who have been closed for most of the COVID. I don't know if the housing division and the mental health division are even engaging with the community-based organizations in terms of, how many people are you seeing? How many people can you reach? So some of that work, I think, needs to be done very quickly before we say, we're going out to the community-based organizations and we're going to pay stipends to their, the consumers of the services before knowing, how the CBOs are operating and how all of our faith-based institutions are operating. How many people are in our shelters? Can we get Zoom into those places so they can participate even in these meetings? And also, one of the things we didn't do tonight was public comment. And I hope that we're either going to stay here and hear from the folks who've been listening to us. But I think we need to move much faster than waiting another month to hear. And I think we need to develop a toolbox. And I think RDA is doing this in how to do community engagement, what the survey looks like, all in one place. So I'm asking our consultants to please speak with RDA. If I'm sure you already have, I'm sure David is keeping an eye on this, but if they are creating, and they're also funded $185,000 to do community engagement and evaluations and stuff, that if their toolbox is already further along and looks really good, why do we have to create our own surveys? So, let's look at, is there any duplication going on here? And if there is, get rid of the duplication of effort and also take the resources that are being developed by RDA and have them shared with us, with this task force, so and our consultants, so that we can move a little bit faster. Because June will be here, and sure, the stimulus money is going to come, and sure, the general fund could spend first and then get the stimulus money and use that later. That's been done before. So there's many ways to look at this instead of just, we don't have the money right now in the contract to start doing the deep work that all of us are asking for. Instead, let's start doing the deep work and say, hey, folks, look, we want to, I would say to David, hear us clearly. We want to do this really well. We want to be engaged in this process. We signed up to support city staff and the consultants to get deep into our community. But I'm not seeing that. I don't want us to hide behind, oh, there isn't enough money, so we can't do it. So you guys in the community-based organizations and $20 stipends to our unhoused folks somehow will get this work done. That's just my opinion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other hands at this time? And we do have it on our agenda to discuss future agenda items.
Can I go?
Yeah.
I had my hand up. Bernali.
Yes, Commissioner Ghosh.
I guess I agree with a lot that has been said, and I'm actually a little shocked that the survey is going out without our task force having a chance to look at it, and it leaves me similarly confused about what our role is in this. I still don't understand what the content looks like. If we are asked to disseminate a survey, I don't see how I would feel confident in disseminating something that I haven't had a chance to engage with. My other question, even as we're struggling with the budget, my question is, for consultants, if you know that the budget is cut and you've sort of come up with a new plan, my question is, do you have a certain target in mind? Like, how many people are you planning to reach? I'm expecting that you're going to be asking, and I wish Liza's idea of like having a subcommittee that we could have done that in the absence of that, I want to put forward some questions around, what is your target number of people you're trying to reach? Can we do a course correction at some point if we see that certain communities have been left out? I'm assuming that you're going to be collecting information from people about how they identify or what their socioeconomic status is or what their race might be. Is that part of the information that you're collecting? So we can say that this is what we set out to do and we did that, or we didn't do that. We need to do deeper work, in these communities. How are we going to know that the survey was successful? I think that's the kind of expertise I hope that y'all are bringing and that you engage with us on, even within that limited budget. I want to know that we're being smart and effective. And I didn't hear any of that today. So going forward, when we're presented with this, I really would love not to hear about that we can do this because of lack of money, but really this is the plan for how we're going to sort of fill the gaps or identify the gaps, and this is where we need folks to step up. But yeah, how are we going to know that the survey was successful in reaching all the groups we're trying to reach without waiting till the end that we have the results? And again, on the content, I really don't understand what kind of questions you're going to be asking. And the reason I'm bringing that up is I think we've heard multiple times that there's a lot of other efforts going on, but my fear is all of those efforts are going to be coming and saying, oh, this is getting covered there, and that's getting covered there. And if not only is that going to lead to duplication of some efforts, but then some other things are going to fall through the cracks. And I don't know what mechanism we have, and I'm looking at David White, because I expect the city manager's office is coordinating this effort, what mechanisms we have to make sure that things don't fall through the cracks. So yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, but I'll stop there for tonight and say that I really hope we get some subcommittees going, because we need time and to move faster. We need that structure.
Thank you, Commissioner. And again, I completely agree fully on subcommittees. That will certainly be on the agenda for our next meeting. And now that I am permanent chair of the organization, I'll make sure that gets on the agenda. Any other hands at this time?
Yes, my hand.
Oh, sorry, Commissioner, go ahead.
I had to step out of the room for about 20 minutes, so I missed much of the discussion, but I got the last 5 or 7 minutes. I share these concerns that what I think I'm hearing is that the commission of the 17 of us may be public relations window dressing, that as we have only 3 or 4 meetings before our job is done, it's understood by those who created the whole thing that we are a window dressing that creates the appearance of popular participation, but without the reality. If that's the case, I'm sorry to hear it. I'm not surprised to hear it. That's a very common occurrence in how things are done in politics. And I hope things that are other than as they appear, or if they are as they appear in this unfortunate way, there may be things that can be done. And I look forward to talking with some of the commissioners between now and our next meeting about what kind of leverage we may have to bring about real changes rather than cosmetic changes. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think something that we'll have to propose is really a review of the different areas that we've seen broken down, for specialized care unit, BERCDOT, to the priority dispatch, the other priority areas that go beyond even that, and see where exactly we fit in. And when I say fit in, in my thinking, I'm thinking, I know there are community members who have done work in many of these different projects already, but certainly, we're the task force on reimagining public safety. We should have an opinion on these items at minimum, if not having a role in drafting the policy itself. Certainly, that's my understanding, and that is something I will make clear. If not, I would question what we're doing also. So I will make that clear. Commissioner Malvito.
Just really quickly, Commissioner Upton brought up a really wonderful idea, which was, folks meeting outside. And I just realized that there's a few people on here who I have their contact info, but I don't have everyone's contact info. And I would just love the opportunity to talk to everyone here on the side and just, get to know each other, not just once a month. So would it be possible for the consultants to send contact lists if that's comfortable with folks? Is that something that is within reason, even if it's just an email?
Yeah, I think that's the city manager has the contact list for but actually I think we might have, but I'll ask Dave White.
We do have it. I guess I'd want to make sure that we get affirmative communication from everyone. You're okay with it being shared. I will just remind everyone about the Brown Act presentation we received. So the last thing you want to do is find yourself in conflict with that. But we can send out an email, and if everyone confirms they're okay with it being shared, we're more than happy to share that contact information.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, Vice Chair Chima, and then I would ask that we move on, just given the time.
Okay. This is a public entity, and at least on the Mental Health Commission, our information is public. So I don't know why it's different on this commission. Maybe David can explain it to us later, but I'm very comfortable. Everybody knows my information, but I'm very comfortable sharing that and also being very careful about not breaking any rules, because, if you're one day late in filing something in Berkeley, you can get kicked off a commission. So having had that experience, I'm going to be really cautious of behaving myself here. I also believe that that city staff can facilitate forming clusters off of our list and our expertise, seeing that they saw our applications, they know, and maybe forming clusters very quickly of maybe four people, group of 4 or 5, so nobody's breaking rules. And those clusters can meet between this meeting and the next meeting, as long as we don't violate the Brown Act. They could cluster us, or we can show our preference for. So if we create like 4 clusters, because I was hoping that we would be seeing the same information the consultants would be seeing, and that we would be working together in terms of that we would also be helping with the report and helping the consultants with our capacity. So let's see how that's going to work. But I'm requesting that maybe we be creative and innovative, like Hector said, and form these clusters very quickly and start doing the work. A lot of the information that the consultants are going to get is going to be public information. So it's not like we can't request it as individuals from the city to give us the same information. When Jenny Wong's report comes out, it's going to be a public report. When whatever is happening in BPD, when they come up with, their budget and all, I'm hoping that those are going to be public documents. At least that's my understanding, is that once those kinds of reports happen, they don't just go to, consultants who are writing more reports, but they actually become public documents. David, am I correct in that, or am I misinformed?
I'm not sure I entirely sure what you're referring to, but for example, like our city auditor's work, you know, as that becomes available, her intent is to fully present that and provide that to this group. But, you know, as the independent auditor, you know, she'll be producing and making that work available. Nothing that David and his team produce will become finalized until after it's discussed and gone through with this commission, with this task force. So all of that will be publicly available and will be reviewed and discussed by this body before anything is, you know, certainly considered a final document. At least that's how I'm understanding it. David, if you want to correct me, please do.
That's right.
Commissioner Fine.
You know, I was just going to say, in mid-December, our Research Development Associates came to the council meeting because there was concern that they did not have diverse enough staff in order to reach out deeply into the community to have diverse community engagement. And they still were awarded the contract. It's $100,000. But what they did with our group, which is 8 or 10 people, is to have us work with them to create a list of like 100 organizations from the ground up, from the people we know, developing the rapport and trust or building upon that. And this contract's $270,000. And I have briefly talked about the content of the community engagement. And I'm just not understanding why we didn't have that kind of process like we did with RDA in order to lay out the community engagement plan for the city of Berkeley, particularly when the RFP and the omnibus package legislation of July 14 was very specific to elevating the voices of Black, Latinx, API, LGBT, people who are harmed by all different kinds of things. And I'm not hearing that here. And so I'm hoping maybe we can look at that picture as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, I imagine David and the rest of the staff have taken many notes on the commissioners have said. I agree. I think, you know, big picture will be number one, figuring out fully what our role is and how we can interact with these other projects that are already going on. Number two, the community engagement process, you know, understanding, you know, where things have been done previously, how those tie in to what we can be doing now, and, you know, how potentially the work of RCA and others can help us launch this quicker. I think those would be big factors as we move forward. And we'll be getting into our future agenda items after this item.
So I have one question, Nathan. Will the chair and the vice chair be able to meet with the consultants and with staff between now and the next step so we can sort some of this out together? Or are the two Davids and their staffs going to figure all this out? Or do you need the support of the chairs to do that? Because I can already hear community voices saying, told you, you were window dressing.
I think let David and I get together and we'll figure out we'll reach out to you and Chair Mizell will figure out next steps.
Okay, yeah, look forward to that conversation. Alrighty, Commissioner Harder.
Would it be possible to just loop the entire commission into those communications? Is there a procedural reason why it would just go to the chairs?
To my knowledge, I'm not the expert on the Brown Act, but if, you know, certainly if there's a quorum of members, that would be problematic since we would be probably discussing items on the agenda. I don't know, possibly. But then again, there could be the serial meeting requirement if 8 of us are there talking about potential agenda items. I don't know. I'm not the legal expert here, but I think there may be issues there. But if there are not, I'd be happy to open it up. But hopefully we can get opinion from the city attorney. Okay.
Public comment, isn't that like if it's on the agenda,
Yes,
are we
will.
breaking some rule here, David, by not having done that piece?
No, Vice Chair, we're not breaking rules because we will still have public comment. My intention in the future will be to have 2 public comment sections. One at the start so we can hear what community members want us to address, to look at, and then one at the end as a response to whatever has taken place. For this meeting, we'll just have the one at the end, but for the future, we will have more participation. Okay, Mr. Houghton?
I think the law would permit us to have public comment whenever we want. We can have it when at the times we've pre-scheduled it, and we can change course in the middle of a meeting and decide to have it right now or 5 minutes. Whenever we want to hear from the public, we as a commission, I believe, have the right to hear.
You are correct, Commissioner. We could amend the rules at any time to allow for public comment. Okay, I think we are ready to move on. I'm sorry, Commissioner Fine, was your hand up from before or? Okay, great. Let's go on to our next item, which was the auditor's presentation, but given she has already spoken, I believe we can move to future agenda items.
Did you want to take public comment now, Chair Mizell, or did you want to wait until after that?
Yeah, let's do public comment now.
Okay, there are 2 folks who have hands raised. Shumika, do you want me to bring them in?
Yes, please. Nancy was first.
Okay,
Nancy
yeah, I
Rader.
see.
Hi there.
Nancy, you should be able to speak.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Nancy Rader, up in District 6. I just really wanted to underscore the overarching concerns that were expressed by 4 of the task force members about how the city has organized the various elements of this process into separate silos. Dispatch and the special care unit, BERCDOT, they're all interrelated and integral parts of the reimagining process. So not only should your task force have purview over all of those things, so you can consider them in relation to each other, but the city should be doing the same, closely coordinating these things rather than having them in silos. It just doesn't make any sense to me to organize the effort this way. And I hope that the city considers reorganizing the whole thing. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll now bring in Carol Morosevich.
Alert audio now muted. Alert hand now lowered. Alert audio now.
Carol, you should be able to speak.
Alert, you are muted. Press Alt+A to unmute your microphone.
Oops.
Or press the space key to temporarily unmute. Meeting tools, raise hand button.
Carol, where are you?
Alert hand now raised.
Can we come back to Carol?
Zoom window.
Yeah.
Flick up to move to new notification. Task.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak, Kelly Hammergren. I just wanted to say I have many of the same concerns that a number of you have addressed on the committee, that you're just window dressing and that the decisions are being made out of the city manager's office and probably the mayor's office, and then it will just come to you for a stamp of approval. And I was really hoping that reimagining public safety would be an actual process where the task force had real engagement and involvement and input. And from everything I've heard tonight, I think that David White's comment very early on at the beginning that when you were asking about your input in certain ways, that it wasn't the purview of the task force. And then to not even be involved with the survey and to not be engaged with the consultants. All of this is really concerning if we're going to have a real process. And this just feels like so many things that happen in Berkeley is, we've reached out, we've gotten public involvement, and aren't you happy with what we've decided? So, and the police budget is over by 3.5 million for overtime for the first half of the year. That was announced this morning in terms of, at the budget committee, in terms of finding money. So I just wanted to lay that out there. Okay, thank you.
We'll try to bring Carol in.
Alert hand now lowered.
Can you now hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can, Carol.
Okay, thank you. So as Dan and Buna and others have stated, and Kelly Hammergren just noted, it would seem here from the presentation tonight that the consultants are the driving force rather than the task force. And it should be the Reimagining task force that is the driving force that is directing the consultants what they want them to do and what information they want them to produce. I find it extremely disturbing that the survey is going to be released without it even being presented to the task force. It should be actually the task force that is designing the questions and designing the distribution and the analysis of the survey. The consultant should be working for the task force rather than the task force just being rubber stamped. Regarding the budget, it was stated at the council budget committee today by the mayor that the 68 million that was coming in, although it hasn't been clearly defined, would probably be used to backfill certain things that had already been budgeted, and that would free up money for the Police Accountability Board, the Reimagining, the task force, and some other needs. This reimagining is a real opportunity, and one population that's not being looked at, and it includes many different people, people of ethnicity, various ethnic backgrounds, and the homeless, and people with disabilities, both physical and mental health disabilities, is the needs of victims and witnesses and how the police respond to victims and witnesses who are in marginalized communities. This is extremely critical, and I'm concerned that that might be lost. And this is in this whole reimagining. And it's important for that element to be addressed, because this is a real opportunity for that to be addressed, because many times people are not given credibility because of their disability, for example. And this encompasses many different people, and they're not properly addressed as victims, or again, as being credible witnesses. The last thing I just wanted to note was that the city clerk's office has all commission information available to the public, so you would be able to receive each other's contact information in that manner. Thank you, and I hope you have a lot more power than it appeared would be the case tonight, and that you will be informing the consultants what you want to see them produce instead of vice versa. Thank you.
Hello?
Commissioner?
Are you calling on me, Upton?
Oh,
And there are no more raised hands, Chair. So
My hand is raised.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Upton, I was talking about members of the public.
Oh, sorry.
Commissioner, do you have anything to say at this moment? We're going into future items now.
I do. There's some things that I think I would like to communicate to my fellow commissioners, and we don't need to wait on the city to send us the contact information. I'm asking all of you commissioners who are on the call now to send me your email addresses, and then I'll write to you so that we can get on that without delay. My email address is eopton1@gmail.com.
And again, I advise commissioners to be aware of the Brown Act and its requirements.
I am aware of that. And trading addresses is something that Brown Act does not prohibit.
I understand. I just wanted to make sure that's clear for commissioners. Many people make that mistake, especially people who are not as familiar with those rules. But thank you, Commissioner. Moving now to future items, potential future items for the agenda. There are certainly many. I open it up to you, commissioners.
Dan's hand is up.
Commissioner Upton.
No, I've lowered my hand. I don't have anything I feel I need to say right now.
Dan Lindheim's hand is up.
Oh, my apologies. Mr. Lindheim. Oh, yeah, you're muted, sir.
Yeah, sorry. So I would like to hear from everybody who is producing something. So I'd like to hear from the fire chief on what they're doing on dispatch. I'd like to hear from the consultant who's doing the project on some form of mobile response. I'd like to hear from everybody who is one of the players here who we may have some relation to deal with.
Agreed. Mr. White?
Yeah, that is absolutely no problem. And that is one of the core requirements within the enabling legislation itself, is to make sure that we coordinate all the different efforts and activities that are going on through this task force. So I will reach out to everybody. I was hoping we would do BERCDOT at the April 8th meeting, but I realized quickly that that's actually spring break for the parents who are on the Zoom call. So I don't know that our public works director will be available then, but I will reach out to the others and see who we can get, and I'll coordinate that with you, Chair Mizell.
Thank you. Commissioner Harder?
Given that many people in this Zoom room are still confused about our purpose and purview and general, purpose, our purpose, I would like that to be cleared up, explicated for us. I also would like to have a clearer understanding of that 50% budget cut. I don't quite see where that responsibility falls, and that's a huge portion of why I joined this committee and why people I know were excited about this commission. And it was a big part of the omnibus bill, right? 50%. So I haven't heard the number 50% yet, and that confuses me and concerns me slightly. Like, that's an important objective in my mind. So I'd like to have that explicated as well. And then additionally, obviously we need subcommittees, and I'd like to kind of push back on the narrative or the idea that there's a dichotomy between doing it well and doing it quickly. I think that with subcommittees and additional meetings, we can do both. So.
Thank you, Commissioner. Subcommittees will definitely be on the agenda. Any other potential future agenda items at this moment? Okay.
So one of the things, Chair Mizell, I might reach out to you about is scheduling for sure a special meeting. I'll just say it out loud so folks can think about it on April 29th, which is the 5th Thursday of the month. Our city auditor, Jenny Wong, will be ready to present on the calls for service analysis by then, as well as I believe, David, if you're still on the call, I believe he'll be ready to present with the new and emerging models of community safety by then as well. So I want to throw that out there, and I can work with you, Chair Mizell, to get a ping out to the group about definitely having a second meeting in April.
That sounds perfect. Okay. Any other items, Commissioner? All right. Seeing none, I think we can entertain a motion to adjourn. Again, with the full understanding that in my capacity as chair, I will ensure we have subcommittees discuss at our next meeting and have a clear idea of our scope, powers, responsibilities, which in my mind are broad, giving the broad overview we are given on this task force. And you know, I will do the best I can to make sure that it's clear. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Motion, Commissioner Malvito. We'll need a second if we want to go home tonight. No.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Fine. We have a second. Ms. Cole, if you can call the roll.
Sure. Commissioner Fine?
Yes.
Yes. Vice Chair Chima?
Yes.
Commissioner Dangerfield?
Yes.
Commissioner Hyde?
Yes.
Commissioner Harger?
Yes.
Commissioner Lindheim?
Yes.
Commissioner Walker? Commissioner Ghosh?
Yes.
Commissioner Ijigu?
Yes.
Commissioner Opton?
Yes.
Mr. Blake? Mr. Blake? Okay. Commissioner Polk?
Yes.
Commissioner Malvito?
Yes.
Chair Mizell?
Yes.
Commissioner Diaz?
Yes.
Commissioner Letzger?
Yes.
Commissioner Ho? Commissioner Ho? Commissioner Hyde? Or I'm sorry, I already called Commissioner Hyde. One more time, Commissioner Blake? Okay, meeting adjourned.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone.
Everybody have a good night.
Thank you all very much.